We'll begin in one moment. Okay, welcome everybody, Bruchim Haboyim, to the Hadran, to learning the Hadran presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Mesechta Chagigah. It deals both with the opening of the Mesechta and the conclusion of the Mesechta. It's a siyum on Chagigah and a Hadran on Chagigah. Please open your source sheets. If you go to theyeshiva.net, you have the source sheets, and the truth is, we could post it in the Zoom, but it's also on the yeshiva.net on the homepage. The first thing, you have source sheets. Let me open it here. Okay, beautiful. Let me post it in the chat. Okay. Okay, those of you who are on Zoom, if you go to the chat, I just sent a link to the source sheet so you can open it there and follow inside. You can also see it on the yeshiva.net. Just opening my source sheet so we can have it inside here. Okay, just by the way, at 2:30, I'm gonna do this Hadran in Hebrew. So those of you who are more comfortable in Hebrew, I'm gonna do it for the crowd in Eretz Yisrael or Hebrew speakers. It's going to be on our YouTube channel in Hebrew and on our website in Hebrew. If you go to lilmod.net, that's our website in Hebrew, it's gonna be there live. And also on our YouTube channel in Hebrew. And we're going to do this shir. I mean, it'll be a little different, but the same theme in Lashon Kodesh. Okay. Just trying to get comfortable here because somebody added a monitor, so I have to get used to it. Okay. Okay, I hope by now everybody opened the source sheet so we could begin. Today we begin.
Rabbi, do you have it in English?
Ah?
Do you have it in English by any chance?
No. You know, if you go to Project Likutei Sichos, if you go to the website Project Likutei Sichos, you go to that website, projectlikuteissichos.com, and over there they have materials in English. It's the second Sicha of this week.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So we begin to learn now, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, a Hadran, a Mesechta Chagigah, that was presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe at a long Farbrengen, a series of Sichos, talks, Shiurim, on the beginning and the completion, the end of Mesechta Chagigah. The Daf Yomi is now starting Mesechta Chagigah and will soon be finishing Mesechta Chagigah, so it's extremely apropos for many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews, perhaps even more, are embarking now on a journey of Mesechta Chagigah, to explore Mesechta Chagigah, to learn Mesechta Chagigah from beginning to the end. And this siyum of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Mesechta Chagigah is a hadran that deals both with the beginning of the Mesechta, primarily with the conclusion of the Mesechta. The Rebbe presented this hadran on Chagigah at the Farbrengen of Chaf of Tovshin Lamed Aleph. That is the 20th of 1971. As I mentioned in previous siyumim and hadranim and mesechtas that we learned together, Shabbos, Mesechta Erev, Mesechta Pesachim, the Rebbe would make a few siyumim mesechtas, a few siyumim a year, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, sometimes a siyum on the whole Shas, or on the whole Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, on the whole Rambam, and sometimes a siyum on an individual mesechta. Usually it was at all the yard sites, because by a yard site there's a debate in halacha whether you fast or you, by the Chassidim they have a farbrengen, they have tikkun. So to be yotzef, everybody would always make a siyum of a mesechta. So there was the yard site of his father, Chaf Av, the 20th of Av. His father passed away in 1944 in Kazakhstan in exile. Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the rabbi of the Dnepropetrovsk, Yekaterinoslav in Ukraine. His yard site is Chaf Av. So the Rebbe would each year make a farbrengen and make a long siyum on a mesechta. Was Vav Tishrei is his mother's yard site. She passed away in 1964. Rebbe Tzanchani would make a siyum. He would make a siyum on Yutas Kislev, where they finish Shas, sometimes on the whole Shas or on Mesechta. Also make a siyum usually Yud Shvat, which is the yard site of his father-in-law. Erev Shavuos, usually there was a siyum. And sometimes other occasions. There was also a siyum, sometimes on his birthday, Yud Aleph Nisan at the Farbrengen. That year, Tavshin Lamed Aleph, the Rebbe also made siyumim. On the yard side of his mother, Vav Tishrei, he made a siyum, Tavshin Lamed Aleph. And now, Chaf Av, Tavshin Lamed Aleph was a siyum on Mesechta Chagigah. I just wanted to look something up. Now, right, I was looking up what siyum he made, Vav Tishrei. I remember we learned it together, it was Mesechta Yuma. We learned it a few months ago, Mesechta Yuma. Amar Rebbe Akiva, Shreichem Yisrael, in the beginning of Yuma. That was that year, Lamed Aleph, and this is Chaf Av, in the summer, Mesechta Chagigah. Now, this Hadran was published in Likutei Sichos, volume 16, Parshas Truma, one part of the Hadran. Another part of the Hadran was published in Likutei Sichos, volume 16, Parshas Vayakel, because it was a long Hadran with different aspects. So today, Project Likutei Sichos, where they learn the Likutei Sichos every week. This week we're learning this Sicha, so I'm going to give a shir today on the part of the Hadran of Parshas Truma, and then in a few weeks, Be'ezer Hashem Bli Neder, we'll have the shir on the second part of the Hadran on Chagigah, the end of the Gemara, which will be Be'ezer Hashem Parshas Vayakel, and we'll announce and notify the Olam about it. Okay. This, I don't know if the word is excited, but I'm extremely excited and enthusiastic about this shir, because I remember this sikha was given me before I was born. I was born a year later. But many, many years ago, when I was still a yeshiva bacher, I heard this sikha on tape, on recording. Then we listened to tapes in a tape recorder. And it didn't just blow me away. It wasn't just moving and transformative, but it was an exceptional display of how to learn. The Rebbe's siyumim on Mesechta says Hadran were not just a vertel at the end of the Mesechta, a nice word, a nice lesson, a little pshetel. Many of the Rebbe's Hadranim on the Mesechtas of Shas laid down fundamental ideas in how to learn the Mesechta. The Rebbe would explore different sugyas of the Mesechta, especially the beginning and the end. Explain it according to the Rishonim and according to the Acharonim, with tremendous lumdas and amkus and pkiyas. And as we will see in this one, it's unique, because here, as I once heard from Rabbi Yoel Khan, Zechrona Livracha, who heard from the great Lithuanian Gaon Reb Chaim Zimmerman, Zechrona Livracha, that the Rebbe's Derech Halimud takes you back to the Yesodis. In other words, sometimes you could learn things, and each situation is just an individual discussion about that particular topic, and you try to understand it. But here, it's like going back to the back-end program of Torah, seeing the Torah from a bird's eye view, and taking many different debates that seem completely disconnected from each other, and showing the underlying paradigms of thought that guided the Tanoim and the Amirayim on a practical, legalistic level, a level of halacha, but it also translates into philosophy and into psychology and into avodas ha'adam, into avodah and into teres hanefesh, understanding the soul, and all the way into the practical day-to-day life of a person. So you have the scope of Judaism, the nigla, and the nister, the revealed part of Torah, and the mystical part of Torah, and the spiritual dimension, machshava and ashkafa, kabbalah and chassidus, all the way down to the most practical level. But the primary focus of this hadran is the lumdus, understanding. There was a lot of raid in the sugya of Mesechta Chagigah, but we'll see here that we have here a perspective of how the Rebbe learned and tried to teach people how to learn, to be able to really capture the most fundamental dimensions within the argument, to be able to trace it back to its original core, and then you see sometimes connections between things that seem so disconnected, but really they are part of one larger mosaic and tapestry that manifests itself in many different dimensions of life, all the way down to the practical aspect of life. This shiur is going to be divided into 3 sections. The first section is going to be the introduction, where we're going to learn the end of Mesechta Chagigah. And I just have to say, it's a little complicated, especially if you're not familiar with this type of learning. So you may be tempted at some point to say, this is not for me. But I guarantee you, with God's help, we're going to try to explain it so that everybody will be able to understand it, at least on a basic level. And it's well worth it. After that, we're going to go to the second part of the shiur. Second part of the shiur is going to be exploring the world of Hillel and Shammai expressed throughout Mishnaic and Gemara, throughout the whole Talmud. One aspect of the inner world of Hillel and Shammai and the schools that they created. There's the school of Hillel, the school of Shammai. The last part of the shiur is going to be bringing it back to the conclusion and the beginning of Chagigah, and then applying it to a person's daily life in our relationships with ourselves, with other people, with our children, with the Jewish people, individually, collectively, and with Hashem. Let me give now a brief introduction so that you should be able to understand what is going to be unfolded. In Parshas Truma, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to build the tabernacle, to build the Mishkan and all of the pieces of furniture in the Mishkan. Among them you had 2 altars, the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, the Mizbeach HaZav, the copper altar and the golden altar. The copper altar is discussed in Parshas Truma, the golden altar is discussed at the end of Parshas Tetzaveh. The golden altar was an altar that remained in the Heichal, that was roofed with the tapestries, they had a roof, the tapestries, it was inside the Mishkan and later inside the Beis HaMikdash, where most Jews would not enter, even though the Kohanim would go in to do the service there, and they would go in every day to bow, all of the Kohanim that served. But that was off limits to most people. That was the golden altar. It was made of acacia wood. It was built from atzei shittim, but it was plated with gold. On that Mizbeach, they used to burn incense every single day. Every single morning and afternoon, there was a kohen who would burn incense on the golden altar. And again, it was plated because it was really made of acacia wood under the gold. That was one Mizbeach. It's called the Mizbeach HaPnimi because it was inside, the inside. Then there was the Mizbeach HaChitz in the outer altar. That was already in the courtyard of the Mishkan, or later in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, known as the Hazara. Later, when Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash in Jerusalem, this Mizbeach is known as Mizbeach HaNechoshes, because the Torah says in Parshas Yisro and then in Parshas Truma that it was as follows. It was built as follows. The walls of the tabernacle were made of copper-coated wood. So again, the walls were built of acacia wood, atzei shittim, but it was coated with copper. Now the hollow interior was filled with earth every time the Mishkan was set up. The Mishkan would travel in the desert over the 40 years, so they would take this altar that was hollow, they would transport it, and then they would set it up. Again, the walls were made out of wood, but it was coated with copper, so it's called Mizbeach HaNechoshes, and the interior of it was made of earth. That's why the Torah says in Yisro, Mizbeach Adama Tasali. It's a Mizbeach made of earth, but the walls were made of wood, and it was coated with copper. Okay, I hope that was clear. Now we go to the next step. Next step. The Torah says that utensils, most utensils, for example, metal utensils, wooden utensils, utensils made of gold, of silver, of copper, of other metals, iron, can become tameh. If, let's say, a dead sheretz, a dead weasel, falls in to a pot made of metal, or to a pot made of wood, or to a bowl of wood, or a cup of wood, these are mekabel tumah. They are susceptible to impurity. Now, in our days, the laws of purity and impurity are not part of daily Jewish life, only in a few very small instances. But you have to understand that at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the laws of purity and impurity were as relevant and what's the word I'm looking for? They were as relevant and so much part and parcel of the fabric, the daily fabric of Jewish life, because much of Jewish life, especially in Eretz Yisrael, especially in Yerushalayim, revolved around the laws of purity and impurity. So there was a deep conscientiousness and sensitivity to these laws. So people are not so familiar with them today, and sometimes people just shut down when you start hearing the word tumah and tara, but please don't, because you'll understand the principles here. So let's say you have a tumah, a source of impurity that falls into a vessel. The vessel now becomes impure. Now, most vessels, it's not a problem. You put it in a mikveh, in a kosher mikveh, and the vessel is now pure. It's fine. There is an exception called klei cheres, which means an earthenware vessel that's made of mud and straw, and it's baked in the oven or in the sun. Here, you can't put it into the mikveh because it's porous and you have to dissolve it. You have to break it, and then it becomes pure, and then you can put it back together. But most of the vessels, let's shut this, most of the vessels, you put it in the mikveh and it becomes pure. But here there is one important halacha that we have to understand. The Torah teaches us that klei eitz ha'asur l'nachas is not mekabel tumah, which means a wooden vessel that has a cavity, that has an interior, is susceptible to tumah. A wooden bowl, a wooden spoon, a wooden barrel. If it's flat, if it's pshutei klei eitz, it's not susceptible to tumah biblically, only on a rabbinic level. But if it has a cavity inside, let's say it's a bowl, right? And it's made of wood, it's susceptible to tumah. But there's an exception. Klei eitz ha'asur l'nachas. If you have a wooden utensil that's made to be stationary, it's large, it's very large, and therefore it's really designated to stay in one place and not to move. So we learn out from the Torah that it's not susceptible to tumah. And the reason is, I'm not going to get into the details now, but the Gemara discusses this in Chagigah, because in Parshas Shmini, the Torah speaks about different utensils that are susceptible to tumah, and it compares the wooden utensil to a sack. A sack, just like other garments, is susceptible to tumah. Garments are susceptible to tumah. That's why if somebody died in a person's home, remember in the olden days there were no hospitals, so people died in homes. A person dies in somebody's home, everything that was under the same roof now becomes tameh, if it's susceptible to tumah. So it's a very serious situation. If you're a kohen and you're going to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, or you have to eat karbanis, or you have to eat holy food, you have to know what's happening. That's why the laws of tumah were so important, especially for kohen, but really for all Jews, because Jews would travel to the Beis Hamikdash, Jews would eat karbanis sometimes, so you always had to know the laws of tumah and tara. So if you have a wooden utensil that's big, it's a big wooden vessel that's not made to move around, the Torah compares it to a sack. A sack is made to carry. That's what we use a sack for, right? When it's empty, we carry it. When it's filled, we carry it. So we learn from this that the only type of wooden utensil that is makabel tumah is a wooden utensil that's going to be like a sack, which means you could carry it around when it's full, you can carry it around when it's empty, but if it's a big wooden utensil that's made to be stationary, you're not going to carry it around when it's full. It's very hard and it might break, it's too much weight, it's too vulnerable, so therefore it's not mekabel tumah. Okay. Once you understood this introduction, let's now go to the next step, and here we're going to look inside the last mission of Mesechta Chagigah. It's Mesechta Chagigah Daf Chavav. Open up your source sheets if you haven't done yet, and let's see inside, okay? Follow carefully. This is the last mission of Chagigah. Says the Mishnah, Keitzad ma'avirin al taras hazara. Okay, I guess here we need another little introduction, and that is, we have a problem. There was a group of Jews known as Amei Ha'aretz, which meant they could have been very fine people and sometimes very sensitive and good people. The challenge is that they often did not know the nuances of the laws of purity and impurity. So they weren't always scrupulous, either because of ignorance or for other reasons in the laws of Tumah and Tara. So they were always afraid, the sages were afraid, that if they don't know the laws, they may be impure, or their food may be impure, their vessels may be impure, but they don't know it. Now, all year it's not such a challenge, but Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, all Jews came to the Beis HaMikdash. There was a mitzvah, Aliyah L'Regel, that's the opening of Chagigah, Hakol Chayavim B'Riyah. All Jews are obligated, all male Jews are obligated to come Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot to the Beis HaMikdash. And they would roam around the mountaintop, the Temple Mount, and they would roam around the Beis HaMikdash, and they would bring offerings. And of course, people touch things, especially if you're coming all the way from a far place, maybe from Babylonia or from a remote place. You're coming to the Beis HaMikdash, and you may touch vessels, you may touch the altars, you may touch the menorah, a kohen who goes into the Heichel and he's an Amaretz, he doesn't know the laws of Tumah and Tara. You may touch the Shulchan, you may touch a lot of these things. So what happened? After the festivals, they had to take all the vessels from the Beis HaMikdash that might have been touched by somebody who was not cautious or was unaware of the laws of Tumah and Tara, and they had to put it all into the mikveh to purify it. That's what the Mishnah says. Keitzad mavrin al taras hazara. What would they do? What was the process of removing everything after Yom Tif to purify the hazara? Says the Mishnah, matbilin es hakelim shahayu b'mikdash. They used to take all the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, and they would immerse them in the mikveh. It's fascinating. Any vessel that was used, any utensil that was used in the Beis HaMikdash that might have been touched over Yom Tif, if it was stored away and nobody touched it, then there's no problem. But if it might have been touched over Yom Tif, you had to put it into the mikveh. V'oimrin lahem, on Yom Tif, they used to say to the people who were there who may have been ignorant, Hizaru, please be careful. Be careful, as the Mishnah continues. Please be careful. I'm sorry, a few words fell out here. Hizaru shaloi tigu b'shulchan. Don't touch the table. There was a table with showbread in the Heichel, and there were kohenim who would go in. Kohenim would go in every day to ban. There may be a kohen who was an Amoritz. He was not careful with the laws of Tumah. Don't touch the table. You know why? Because the table always has to be there, because the Torah says that the bread has to be lefanai tamid, always. They didn't want to have to take the table and put it in the mikveh and take it out. So therefore, they said, please, nobody touch the table, so the table will remain immune. And then the Mishnah continues. All the utensils in the Beis HaMikdash had doubles and triples. You had a second set, and you had more than two sets. You had extra sets, copies, in case, throughout the whole year, a vessel may become tamei. You don't want to get stuck. Remember, they used a lot of utensils in the Beis HaMikdash. They used forks, and of course they used knives, and they used bowls, and they used various types of spoons and various types of pliers. So many different vessels that were used, and they could become tamei. So they always had an extra set and a third set to be able to replace it until the other ones are purified. Now the Mishnah continues. Here's the key. Kol ha'kelim shoyu b'mikdash tu'unin tefillah. All the utensils in the Beis HaMikdash needed to go to the mikveh after Yom Tov. Chutz mi mizbeach hazav mizbeach hanachoshes. Besides the golden altar and the copper altar. Those were the only two that didn't need. Besides, the table didn't need because nobody touched it. But everything else that was touched had to go to the mikveh. Why did the altars not have to go to the mikveh? Obviously, they would need a big mikveh. He couldn't put it into a small mikveh. But why didn't they have to go to the mikveh? They can also become tameh. Copper can become tameh. Wood can become tameh. Gold can become tameh. Gold is a metal. Copper is a metal. Wood becomes tameh. The answer is mepnei shein kekarka. The answer is because the Torah defines these altars as earth. And earth is not susceptible to tumah. You can't make earth tameh. And even vessels that are made from earth, klei adama, if it's not baked in the oven, if it's baked in an oven, it's called klei cheres. But klei adama, if you take just earth and you turn it into a vessel, it's so cheap, it's not makabel tumah. Even, by the way, stones are not makabel tumah. If you make a vessel out of stone, rock, it's not makabel tumah. But earth is not makabel tumah. And the Torah calls the altars earth. This is Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, this is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. That's why I'm not worried about the altars. I don't care if somebody was impure, even if somebody, say, touched a corpse. And he didn't know, he was unaware, and he comes and he touches the Mizbeach. I'm fine, it's earth, it's not makabel tumah. The Chachamim say, mipnei shein mitzupin, because the altars were plated, they were covered. The Gemara is going to explain. Says the Gemara, Mizbeach hanachoshes, what does Rabbi Eliezer mean that the altars are considered earth? So the Gemara explains. It comes to the copper altar, the ksiv, it says in Parshas Yisro, Mizbeach adama tasali. Build for me an altar made of earth. Adama is earth, like Adam. It's called Adam because he came from the Adama. And as I explained, the altar of copper was filled with earth in the Mishkan. And then there were walls of wood plated with copper. But the Torah says it's clearly Mizbeach Adama. So the Torah excluded it from the world of Tumah. What about Mizbeach Hazav? What about the other Mizbeach? The other Mizbeach wasn't filled with earth. It was, you remember, acacia wood plated with gold. The Ksiv, it says in Bamidbar, HaMenoira v'HaMizbechais. It speaks about the families that were transporting, the Levim that were transporting the vessels when they traveled. The Menorah and the altars. Iskush Mizbechas Elazar. That's very significant. When the Torah says Mizbechas in the plural, it juxtaposes, it equates the altars with each other. Mizbechas. The Torah could have just said one altar and another altar. The fact that it's put together in one word is very significant. This is how the sages learned Chumash. Every word and the way a word was phrased became significant. It's called iskush, hekesh. Not just juxtaposed in the same verse, it's in the same word. Mizbechais. So we compare, we equate the golden altar to the copper altar. And just like the copper altar, Rabbi Eliezer says, is called earth, Mizbeach Adam, and therefore it's not susceptible to Tumah. So the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar, is also not susceptible to Tumah. So they didn't have to go to the mikveh after Yom Tov. Baruch Hashem, the altars were good. It would have been a very big headache. The menorah, for example, you had to take to the mikveh. You had to take to the mikveh. That's why there were different menorahs. But the Mizbechas didn't have to take to the mikveh. Everything seems clear, right? Good. The Chachamim say, Mepnei shehein mitzupin. Somebody's asking a good question. By the way, you can ask your questions. You can ask your questions on the website, on the yeshiva.net. You can in the comments, or you can ask your questions in the chat on the Zoom. I'm going to take the question. But somebody's asking, I don't understand. The Mizbeach was wood that was stationary. It was a wooden vessel that was stationary. So what's the problem? Good. Wait. Let's learn the next piece. The Chachamim say, because they're plated. The Gemara says, this doesn't make sense. Adarabba, kiven the mitzupininu mitamu. On the contrary, that's a reason to say that the altars should be impure, not pure. Rabbi Eliezer says, the reason the altars are pure is because they're compared to earth. Fine. Chachamim say because they're plated, but I don't understand. The Gemara says, Adarabba, if they're plated, that's a reason that the Mizbechah should be tameh, because metal becomes tameh. Gold could be tameh. Copper becomes tameh. So the Chachamim are saying, Mipnei shein mitzupin, the altars are plated. Okay, they're plated, so that's a reason to be metameh them. Says the Gemara, Ema, you're right. You have to understand the text differently. Ema v'chachamim metameh mipnei shein mitzupin. The Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer. They don't agree with it. Rabbi Eliezer says the altars are tahir because they're compared to earth. The Chachamim say, sorry, I look at the plating, I look at the cover. And because I look at the cover, so therefore, the covers are gold, metal, copper, they're tamei. Wow, that's a huge chiddush that the Chachamim believed that the altars became tamei and they had to go to the mikveh. But there's another way of learning the Mishnah. They're not arguing. Rabbi Eliezer Kamri. The rabbis are actually responding to Rabbi Eliezer. They're telling him as follows. Ma datech mishum de mitzupin. This is how Rashi explains it. Ma datech. Why did you tell us that the reason the altars are pure is because they're like earth? I have a better reason. They are wooden utensils that are made for stationary positions. They're made to be in one place, like you asked. Clay eitz asi lenachas. Why does Rabbi Eliezer have to give this whole pilpul that the Torah compares the altar to earth, Mizbeach Adam, he calls it an altar of earth, and the second Mizbeach is compared to the first one, so it's tar. Forget about it. Let's say it wouldn't have been earth. Let's say it would have just been wood. Okay, sure wood. It's made to be in one place, so it's not Makabal Tumah. So what were you thinking? Mishum de Mitzupin. You were worried because the altars are plated. So therefore they're not considered wooden utensils. They're considered metal utensils. And metal utensils are susceptible to tumah even if they're in one place. Even if they're large and they're made to be stationary. If they're metal, they're still susceptible to tumah. That's why you didn't give the reason of clay eitz ha'asui lenachas. Says the Chachamim miftal batal tzipoyin gabayu. Sorry. The plating, the cover, is subordinate to them. Miftal batal. The plating is subordinate to the wood, and therefore it's tahir. Why? Because it's clay eitz ha'asui lenachas. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says the reason the altars are pure is because they're compared to earth. Chachamim said there's no need for that. You don't need to go there. There's a much simpler reason. Because they are wooden pieces of furniture that are large and are made to stay in one place. They're not made to be mobile. They're made to be in one place. And because they're made to be in one place, therefore, they are not susceptible to tumah. Either plated with metal, but they say, miftal batal tzipoyin gabayu. The cover is batal. It's subservient. It's subordinate. It's surrendered to that which is under the plating because it's just a cover. The cover doesn't substitute the substance. So therefore we don't look at the plating. We look at what's inside. We don't look at the outside. We look at what's inside. You look at what's inside. It's wood. The golden altar is made of wood. The copper altar is made of wood. And wood that's stationary is what? Is tahir. That's how the Chachamim respond to Rabbi Eliezer. This is the second explanation in Gemara. First explanation in Gemara is the Chachamim actually argue with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says the altars are tahir. Chachamim say they are tameh. Why? Because they're plated. And because they're plated, we don't look at the earth. We look at the fact that they are metal. The second interpretation in the Gemara is no, the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer. That it's pure, but for a different reason. Rabbi Eliezer says it's pure because it's like earth, and the Chachamim say it's pure. Why? Because it's a wooden utensil that's made to be stationary, even though it's plated. The plating is batal. It's subordinate to that which is under the tzipui. Now, the Rambam, this is how Rashi learns the Gemara. But before we finish the piece of Gemara, we have to understand how the Rambam learns the Gemara. The Rambam learns the Gemara very differently. The Rambam says as follows. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, in his commentary on Mishnayos, in Mesechta Kelim, Perek Yud Aleph Mishnah Dalet, the Rambam in his comment says, and he explains this Gemara. He says this is the meaning in the Gemara Chagigah. He says we have to understand this piece of Gemara very differently. Okay? Now tune in here to what the Rambam says. The Rambam quotes a Sifra, a Torah's Koyanim in Parshas Shmini, that says a fascinating halacha. The Torah speaks about vessels that are susceptible to tumah, and the Torah says in Parshas Shmini, Kol keli asher ya'asam malacha bohem. Any keli, any vessel in which you do work inside of them, and that keli can become tameh. So from here, Chazal, our sages, learned out in Sifra that the only type of vessel that's going to become tameh is a vessel that doesn't have a tzipui, it doesn't have a chipui, it doesn't have a cover, it's not plated. Why? So the Rambam explains. The reason is as follows. Because the tumah didn't touch that which is under the plating. It only touched the cover, because the tumah doesn't go beyond the cover of the vessel. So if you have a wooden vessel that's plated with gold or with metal, says the Rambam, such a vessel won't become tumah even if tumah touches it. You know why? Because the vessel itself didn't come in contact with the tumah. What came in contact with the tumah? The cover of the vessel. But the cover of the vessel doesn't have substance, it's bottle. It doesn't have a real metzias because its whole entity is just to cover. It's a protective or a protection or a decoration for the vessel. So the vessel itself is not tamei because it didn't come in contact with the tumah. The cover of the vessel is not tamei because the cover doesn't have significance. It's bottle. It's like it doesn't have a strong identity because it's just there as a plating for the substance. So therefore the Rambam says the Sifra holds that any vessel that has a plating, has a covering, even if the plating on its own is something that's susceptible to tumah, and the vessel is also, for example, wood covered by metal, is not mekabel tumah. Because again, the vessel itself didn't come in contact with the tumah. The Torah says the only way a keli could become tumah is asher ya'asa malacha behem. The tumah has to come in contact with the vessel itself. If it came in contact with the plating over the vessel is not mekabel tumah. The plating itself is also not tamei. Why? Because it's bottle. It doesn't have real substance. It doesn't have real value, real significance, because it's just there as a cover. It's just there as I don't want to say as a cover-up, but as a protection, as just plating for design for the vessel itself. The Rambam says this is the meaning of the Gemara. Rebbe Eliezer says, why don't the altars become tamei? Because they're compared to earth. No, because they're plated. And the tumah touched what? The tumah touched the gold or the copper. So that's not going to become tamei because it's just a cover. And the mizbeach itself that's made of wood is also not going to become tamei. Why is it not going to become tamei? Because the tumah only touched the cover. It didn't touch the mizbeach itself. So therefore the Rambam says that is the meaning of the Chachamim. Mipnei shehein mitzupin. Because the Mizbeach is plated, so based on the Sifra, such a vessel will never become tummy, and therefore you don't have to send the Mizbeach to the mikveh. This means, Rabbi Eliezer would say, the plating is a reason to become tummy. The issue is the Mizbeach is compared to earth, and earth doesn't become tummy. The Chachamim say, no, the reason it's tahir is because it's mitzupin, so therefore you don't need any other reason. You don't need any other reason. Even if it wouldn't be klei eitz asil anachas, even if it wouldn't be karka, the very fact that it's plated means it has no substance, and therefore it doesn't become tummy, and the keli itself doesn't become tummy because it didn't come in contact with the tumah, so therefore the mizbeach is tahir. This means that Rashi and Rambam have a very serious argument how you learn this Gemara. Because according to Rashi, the fact that the metal is a plating over the wood, the acacia wood of the Mizbeach, is covered with gold or with copper, that covering is actually a reason to make it tameh. It's a reason to make it tameh, the covering, according to Rashi. Right? According to Rebbe Eliezer, it's not tameh. Why? Because it's like karka. And according to the Chachamim, the way Rashi explained it, why is it not tameh? Because it's klei eitz ha'asur lenachas. It's considered stationary, wooden vessel that's not tameh. And as the Gemara explains, and Rashi explains that the Navi Yecheskel called the Mizbeach eitz, so we see that the Torah regards it as wood, not just as copper and gold. The Torah defines it as wood, so it's klei eitz asur lenachas. That's why it's not mekabel tumah. But if you would focus on the tzipui, if you would focus on the plating, of course it would be a reason to be mekabel tumah. According to the Rambam, it's the opposite. It's because it's plated, it's the plating that saves the keli. It's the plating that saves the mizbech. According to Rashi, the tzipui is the problem because it's covered with metal. Elamai Rebbe Eliezer has his reason, and the Chacham have their reason why it's pure. Rebbe Eliezer because it's karka, and the Chacham because it's klei eitz asur lenachas. According to the Rambam, fakert, it's the tzipui that saves it. As we explained, because it's only a covering, and inside there's a keli. Therefore, the tzipui protects the keli from tumah, and the tzipui itself doesn't become tameh. And here the Rebbe raises the big question. The Rishonim say that the Rambam, the Rosh even expresses himself. The Rosh expresses himself, a fascinating expression on the Rambam, What does he say? The Rosh says that the Rambam looked at the Mishnah. He didn't see the Loi Iyin beGemara. He didn't look at the Gemara. The Rikurka says in the Rambam, Tzarech litchayk. The Rambam is very difficult with our Gemara. Why is the Rambam so difficult with our Gemara? Because when you read the Gemara, what does it look like? In the first version, the Gemara says that the Chachamim say it's tameh. Why is it tameh? Because it's mitzupah, because it's plated. And if it's plated, it should be tameh. So we see that the Gemara clearly holds that the Chachamim say that if it's plated, it should be tameh. Then the Gemara says a second version, that the Chachamim say it's tahir. So Rashi explains it beautifully, that the Chachamim are telling to Rebbe Lezer, you were worried about what? You were worried that you can't say klei eitza asui l'nachas because there's a tzipui mipnei shein mitzupin, and therefore you went to karka. Don't worry about it. The tzipui is bottle. Don't look at the tzipui. Forget about the tzipui. The tzipui is bottle, and therefore it's klei eitza asui l'nachas. From both versions of the Gemara, it seems that the Chachamim hold that tzipui is a reason for tumah, not for tara. Comes the Rambam and says, no, Taka, the first version of the Gemara is tzipui is a reason for tumah. The second version of the Gemara is a whole different world. Tzipui is a reason for tara, mipnei shehin mitzupin. It actually works nicely with the word mipnei shehin mitzupin, but the Rosh says, it doesn't seem like from the language of the Gemara that that's what the Chachamim are saying, that the tzipui is a reason for tara, because the first version of the Gemara, the Chachamim actually said clearly that tzipui is a reason for tumah. So even in the second reason, it seems like, what was your problem? Because it was mitzupin, and therefore you don't want to say it's klei eitza asui l'nachas because mitzupin is a problem. Miftal batal tzipui l'gabayu. But according to the Rambam, no, tzipui is actually a reason for tara. And the Rosh and the Rikurkas, which means the Rishonim, feel that this is a difficult way of learning the Gemara. And the Rebbe asks the question, why wouldn't the Rambam in Mesechta Chagigah learn like Rashi? Which seems like a very straightforward way of learning it. Why does the Rambam have to argue with Rashi and see the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim in a completely different way than Rashi? Especially when you see the language of the Gemara, it seems much more consistent with Rashi. And yet the Rambam learns the machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim completely different than Rashi, as we said. According to Rashi, tzipui is a reason for tumah, and according to the Rambam, tzipui is a reason for tahara. Now, this is the introduction. Now let's go back to the Mesechta Chagigah. We finished the argument between Rebbe Lezer and the Chachamim. Now comes the last piece of Chagigah. Changes the language, the whole language now changes, what we call Agada. Go back to your sources. Omar Revavo, Omar Rabbi Elazar. Rebbe Avo said, Rebbe Elazar, Talmidei Chachamim ein or shel Gehenim sheletas behen. Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, the fire of purgatory does not rule over them. It does not rule over them. And he gives a whole kal v'chaim from the salamandra, that if somebody smears the blood of the salamandra, they're immune to fire because it comes from the fire, the salamandra. A Talmid Chacham who is fire, because Torah is fire, certainly is immune to the light of Gehenna. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reish Lakish, Einar Shel Gehenim Sheletas B'Parshi Yisrael. The fire of Gehenna does not rule even among the sinners of Israel. Look at the golden altar. The golden altar was wood plated with gold. And yet, if you could mute yourself, put yourself on mute. The Zoom Chevra, if you could just put yourself on mute, please. Thank you. The golden altar was gold covering wood. After so many years, you would think one of two things would happen. The gold would become ruined from so much fire. Every day you're burning incense on the gold. The gold should get ruined. It wasn't so thick. And also, it should penetrate and the wood should get burnt. It doesn't happen. The Mizbeach remains intact. So he says, Poisha Yisrael, sinners of Israel who are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. Certainly, the fire of Gehenna can't rule over them. If the Mizbeach Hazav, the altar, even though there's a fire that burns on it, but because it's an altar and it's protected and the wood is under the gold, so the gold is not ruined, and even though the gold is thin, the wood is not ruined, even though the fire is burning on it, it should destroy the Mizbeach, it doesn't get destroyed. Certainly, even the sinners among Israel who are filled with mitzvahs like the pomegranate, they're not worse than the altar, and therefore the fire of Gehenna doesn't rule over them. This is how Mesechta Chagigah ends. Now, the obvious question is, I can understand the connection between the previous piece of the Gemara to the last piece, talking about the golden altar. But in the middle, he interposes it with the whole piece about a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar. The fire of Gehenna doesn't rule over him because of a salamander. How does that come in here? Now, you can't say it's an introduction to the second statement, Rish Lakish, because as the Rebbe said then, in Erevin, where this is the source of it, he brings the second one, he doesn't even bring the first one. So how do we understand the continuation here of the Gemara? And what's exactly the connection to the Mizbeach Hazav? Okay, so you have a golden altar. It's covered with gold. Under it is wood. It doesn't get burnt because it's a holy item. What's the connection to the Poisha Yisrael, to the sinner of Israel? And also, is this connected to the whole theme before? It's just, we spoke about the altar. Let's put in something about the golden altar. Is there a thematic connection? So most people think they learn Gemara, it's just, a nice vart that to end it off. But the Rebbe said it's not that way. Every line in Gemara is meticulous and thematically connected and integrated. So what is the thematic connection between this final sugya? This finishes the opening, the first part of the shiur, discussing the questions at the end of Chagigah. We now change the subject completely, and we're going to take a journey into the world of Hillel and Shammai, and the school of Hillel, the school of Shammai. At the end, we're going to come back to Mesechta Chagigah, so put this on the side, not on the side burner, but hold on with this for a few moments. Be'ezer Hashem, we get back to it at the end of the Rebbe's Hadran, at the end of the Sikha. So let's now go to your source sheets. We're going to go, I gave the introduction, so we're going to go in the Sikha, we're going to learn parts inside. We're going to start from, we did the whole introduction, which is a little complicated. You have to learn it well, maybe you have to review it. If you go to your source sheets and you scroll down, we go to page 311, the last line, Seif Gimel. I'm going to read in Yiddish and I'll translate. I'm going to read fast because I want to get through this subject. I want to get through the theme. Es ist nespashe de Minig zu verbinden in Hadran Siyum ha-Mesechta mit ihr Haschala. Was der Tam davon ist nicht le Pulpula le Chidude Ba'alma, nur weil sie haben Taka Ashayches ve Keshen und Teuchen in Yonam, al derech ze beniden de Dan besiyum Mesechta Chagigah mit Haschalasa ukede Kamon. There is a famous Jewish custom that we connect the beginning of a tractate with the end, and the reason is not just, it's cute that the end and the beginning are connected, but because there is always a connection between the beginning and the end, which means we're going to be able to understand the end of Mesechta Chagigah and see how the same idea is reflected in the beginning, as will be explained later. The Biur in das Rambam kemen sagen, to understand the perspective of the Rambam at the end of Chagigah, why he rejects the view of Rashi, and why he learns the whole Gemara differently, and the Rishonim themselves don't understand why the Rambam did it. The Rosh said he didn't look into the Gemara. Imagine saying that on the Rambam. He doesn't mean he didn't look into the Gemara. He means he missed the Gemara, so to speak. He looked at the Mishnah, but because he was writing in his commentary on Mishnaic, but he didn't go through the Gemara, at least not in the proper depth. And the Rikurka says there's a problem in the Rambam, in the Kesef Mishnah, they struggle with the Rambam. So the Rebbe says, you want to understand the Rambam, you have to understand as follows. The Rambam nimmt an as the Machloikes dort zwischen Rabbanan und Rabbi Eliezer. Was Rabbi Eliezer Shamutihu von Talmidei Rebbe Shammai ist verbunden und as Shitose in as Svore Kloles, was ist a Yesoid, zu viel andere Plukte zwischen Beshamai und Besil. Das heißt, Hey, says in that soul, plucked us from Beshami, Ubesil gefindt man at Hadar Shava von in Zeire Deis, und das ist also übergehe verschiedene Sugis, weil Loches in Shas ist mistaber, als der Yesoid von Zeire Machloikes in der Erter ist nicht mit dem besonderen Teuchen für jede Machloikes befneatzmai. Und es sind alle meyusad auf ein Yesoid, und Kumaskanas Hashas bekama mekaimus, as megate lishitase. This is critical to understand. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel have hundreds of arguments throughout the Gemara. Shammai and Hillel themselves also argue. They lived around a century before the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and they created schools of learning, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Now, there are many arguments between them. So the Rebbe says as follows. You could say that each argument should be explained locally, based on the specific topic that they're exploring. He says, but it's much more logical if you see what we call a tzad hashava. If you see that there's a common thread, a common way of thinking that pervades their opinions in so many different areas and categories, it's logical to assume that it's based on a fundamental way of looking at halacha, of looking at the world. You understand? This is the very important principle here. That's what the Gemara has an expression, lishitase. In many places, the Gemara will quote a certain Tana or Amayna, and it says he's following his shita, he's following his view somewhere else, even though it's a completely different topic. In other words, if I see two people, I don't want to psychoanalyze it, but it's a very important principle. If you see two people, let me just mute this. You mind putting yourself on mute, whoever is... If you see two people arguing, I'm not now talking about vindictive arguments, but even a vindictive argument, you see two people arguing about 100 cases, right? A couple is always arguing about different things. You come to an expert, what does the expert say? Let's find out the underlying argument. It's one argument, it's not 100 arguments. It's one argument that you haven't resolved since Sheva Brachas. Okay, so that's in something that we have to repair, we have to fix. But it's true on every level. When you see Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel arguing about so many different things, you could say each argument is about that issue. The Rebbe says no. When you see that there is a common thread in each of the arguments, it's logical to assume that there's a perspective, a paradigm that underlies their views, and it's coming out in each argument in that unique fashion. In fact, as the Rebbe once said, Chai Elul Tavshin Lamed Zayin, when he made a siyum on Mesechta Rosh Hashanah, he said, because if not, really every argument is just an isolated, self-contained issue. You don't see a view. And the Rebbe said everything in Torah is Chachmaschem u'Beinaschem le'enei ha'amim. Every view in Torah is representative of a whole Weltanschauung, of a whole perspective. So he says the real way of understanding Torah is getting to the skeleton, getting to the core, tracing back the argument to the core principles of what was at stake. And then you will see how all the arguments in many different areas are manifestations of one principle. On the other hand, if all the arguments are identical, then you don't have to repeat them. Just say it once and give me the principle. The idea, of course, is that in every one of these debates, the principle comes out in a little bit of a different fashion, or in a significantly different fashion. And if you would have one and not the other one, you wouldn't have known one from the other. In the language of Gemara, it's called sricha. Now, what's the connection with our Gemara? We're talking about Rebbe Eliezer. The answer is based on a story. Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Amid Beis. The Gemara tells a story that there was a bris, and they carried the knife on Shabbos for the bris. Who allows that? Rebbe Eliezer. Rebbe Eliezer has a Mishnah in Shabbos that not only are you allowed to make a bris on Shabbos, you're even allowed to cut wood to make a fire to form a knife for the bris on Shabbos, because all the preparations for a mitzvah are part of a mitzvah. And when they did this, the Gemara says the Chachamim were very upset. Why? Rebbe Eliezer Shamutihu. Rebbe Eliezer was a Shammaiite. Tosfos and Rashi say Shabbos Kuf Lamed Amid Beis, page 130. Rebbe Eliezer was a Shammaiite. He was a student of Beis Shammai. And we know we don't follow Beis Shammai, we follow Beis Hillel. So why did that community follow Rebbe Eliezer and allow the moil to carry a knife in a public domain on Shabbos? That's not the right thing. The moil has to bring the knife before Shabbos. You can't do circumcision before Shabbos. Whatever you can do before Shabbos, you have to do before Shabbos. What do we see from here? Rebbe Eliezer follows Beis Shammai. And as he says in footnote 27, there's a Tosfos in Beit Daf Lamed Daled, where there's an argument of Rebbe Eliezer and the Chachamim, and Tosfos says something is strange about this argument because Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel's views are interchanged, and it should be the other way around. 1 second, we're talking about Rebbe Eliezer. The answer is it's obvious that Rebbe Eliezer followed the school of Shammai. And when Rebbe Eliezer says something, it's the school of Beis Shammai. So the Rebbe says, if you want to understand Rebbe Eliezer here, in our Gemara, and the argument with Rabbanan, you have to understand that Eliezer was following Beis Shammai. The rabbis were arguing with him, they were following Beis Hillel. When we can get to the core of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what was some of the fundamental issues they were arguing about, we'll be able to come back to the end of Chagigah and understand the argument here. What is this? So the Rebbe, we know We know that Shas is divided into 6 chalakim, Zroyim, Moed, Nashim, Nezik, and Kachim, Taris. So the Rebbe is going to go through every Seder, every one of the 6 sections in Shas, and there's many more examples, but he didn't, when he said the Hadran, he said the Olam is tired, so he said there's many more examples, but he's going to give one example from Zroyim, Moed, Nashim, Nezik, and Kachim, and Taris, just to give you a taste of what the argument is about. Now, I should say this, because some people are thinking this. There is another discussion completely different. There's a different discussion about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel arguing about Bekoyach versus Bepoil, potentiality versus actualization. But that's a whole different sugya. That's a whole different idea. At this Fabreng in Chaf Av Lamed Aleph, the Hadran Chagigah, the Lubavitcher Rebbe revealed or excavated a new way of studying and understanding many of the arguments of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If we have time at the end, I could connect it with the other explanation of Bekoyach and Bepoil, but let's discuss what we're learning here now. In Seder Zroyim and Mesechta Brachas, we start with Tractate Brachas, Benusach HaBracha if Eish B'Metzoy Shabbos Kodesh Gefinnen mit Aplukta zwischen Beis Shammai und Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai nim Shabbat Meire Eish, Beis Hillel nim Boire Meire Eish. Und die Gemara ist maß beseh Machleikes, Beis Shammai Savri, Chaden Heide Ikke Benure, in Eish is da blois ein Gavon Eir. Und der Fall darf man sagen, go in Marbelash and Yachid. Beis Hillel Savri, Tuven Heide Ikke Benure. Tanya Nami Hachi, Amru Lahem, Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, Harbe Ma'oides Yesh Ba'oir, in Eish and in da Merere Gvanim, shall have a Saduma, Levana, Yirakrekas, der Fall darf man sagen, Ma'oide, Loshen, Rabbi. I'm going to learn one more paragraph and explain. Es is Poshet, as Beis Shammai und Beis Hillel kriegen nit in Ametzias. Was bei Metzias zet men, as einen da einige Gvanim in Eir. Tavi sagen Beis Shammai as Choden Heide Ikke Benure. Let's explain. The Mishnah says in Brachas, it's a very famous Mishnah, Daf Nun Aleph in Brachas. What's the text for the blessing Mitzvah Shabbos on the candle? What do you guys say at home? What do you chavra say at home? You hold like Beis Hillel. You say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam boirei ma'orei ha'esh. The one who creates the illuminations of fire, the lights of fire. Beis Shammai says no. Beis Shammai says you say Shabara ma'orei ha'esh. Hashem created the illumination, the light of fire. What's the argument? So the Gemara says in Brachas Daf Nun Beis, Beis Shammai holds there's one fire. Bara ma'or ha'esh. There's one light in the fire. Beis Hillel says, sorry, look at the flame. What are you going to see? You'll see Tuva Nahide. There's many illuminations. There's many colors. Take a look at a flame burning, and what are you going to see? You're going to see white. You're going to see red. You're going to see yellow. You may see some other colors. You may see blue. You may see black, right? Don't say boire. Bara ma'or ha'esh, boire ma'orei ha'esh. He creates the lights of fire, many lights, many colors, many illuminations. That's the argument. By the way, there's a quote from Rashi here that you see in every fire many colors, and Rashi brings 3, red, white, and yellow. When the Rebbe said this over, it didn't make it into the Sikha because this was really a completely different subject. The Rebbe said, in parentheses, so to speak, he says, here you see how in every Rashi, there's Kabbalah. There's Kabbalah. Why? Because in Kabbalah, there's Pardes, Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero, who passed away in 1570 in Sfas. He was one of the greatest Kabbalists. He has a book called The Orchard of Pomegranates, and he explains in Shar Hagvanim, the portal of colors, that there are the 3 basic colors of Kabbalah, which are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Chesed, kindness, is white. Gvura is red, and Tiferes is yellow. Just parenthetically. Says the Rebbe, I don't understand. Beis Shammai didn't know that a flame has many colors? I'm asking you. My kid looks at a flame, and he knows that it has many colors. And Beis Shammai says, Choden Heide Ikke Benure. What type of argument is this? Very hard to understand. So you're going to say they're arguing about the physical facts that every person with eyes can look at a flame and see various colors? Nor the Hesber Defun is, here we begin the actual explanation. Beis Shammai halten, as al pi Teure, werden Inyanim beikir bestimmt auf ein Yesoid von seiner Teuchen haklali. Wie sie werden genommen beim ersten klolles dicken Geder Blick. Beis Shammai is of the opinion that when you have to define a law of Torah, you look at things based on the foundation of their general, all-encompassing perspective. In other words, the way they're grasped from an all-encompassing, bird's eye, general view, the first impression. That is very significant. And in Torah, that defines the reality, the way halacha treats reality. We're going to explain more. Al derech haklal ein le'ledayin ala mashen of rayos. It's similar to a famous principle in halacha in Sanhedrin Davav. A judge can only give a verdict based on what his eyes see. The judge may know or speculate or have hearsay or imagine other circumstances, background situations, but ultimately he knows we're limited. So he can use his eyes, which means he has to use his common sense and his eyes to see the reality and judge based on that. So the Rebbe is just using that as a principle, and as he brings it footnote 35, the Noida B'Yehuda was one of the greatest rabbis in the 18th century, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau, the rabbi of Prague. In his Shal Chuvas, Noida B'Yehuda asks a fascinating question. He says, let's say a Jew does a capital sin, and then he does tshuva. He repents. God accepts repentance. Everybody can do tshuva. So there shouldn't be any capital punishments. There shouldn't be any corporal punishments. There should be no punishments because a Jew can do tshuva. And the Noida B'Yehuda says that's true, but ein l'ledayin al mashen of rayos. You can destroy all of law, all of Jewish law, all of law you can destroy that way. The person did tshuva. God accepts tshuva. He says the bottom line is we don't know what's happening in people's hearts. I can't judge. Yes, it's right. You may have done tshuva. And God knows. And therefore, if it's a heavenly punishment, God will take away the punishment. But I'm a judge. I'm human. I'm mortal. I'm frail. I can judge a person based on the tools that I have. The tools that I have is I don't know how to see what is happening in the depth of your heart. And the Noida B'Yehuda says, if you don't say this way, any person who does a capital crime will come to Bezdin and start crying and say, I did tshuva last night. I did tshuva. Okay, my dear boy, give me a hug. Go home. I did tshuva. He says, so there's no more punishment. Why does he mention the Noida B'Yehuda here? Because he's trying to bring out that everyone agrees with this Noida B'Yehuda. We can't judge people based on what's happening in the depth of their emotions. Why? Because then there's no reward and punishment. But Beis Shammai says, when something is happening physically in front of your eyes, that's what we look at. We look at what you see is what you get. The Shitte from Beis Hillel is, as man darf sich wirklich rechnen mit dem, wie die Inyanim werden voneinander klippen, Leute sehen, die Pratim und Neufanim. Hagam, die Pratim sind nicht gleich, und man darf haben Drische v'chuli, und dafke, das ist Machri in Dinei HaTorah. Beis Hillel says that the Torah says you have to primarily think about things from a much more nuanced and detailed perspective. You need to dissect. You need to analyze. Even if that requires investigation and inquiry. And in halacha, that view is much more important. That's how you define reality. Or as he puts it in footnote 36, besignen acher ktsas, to use a little bit of a different language, footnote 36 in the bottom of the page. Lebeis Shammai keveyahu matzev inyan adavar kamoishahu lefanecha. Lebeis Hillel siba suprate amatzev inyan amesuvav shaloi zahu keveya. According to Beis Shammai, halacha says, I want you to establish reality based on the situation, the way it appears before you. The way it appears before you, your subjective experience. Obviously, you can't be biased and you can't take bribes. I'm talking about an authentic person. If you have no integrity, get out. You have no connection to Torah, you have no connection to halacha, get out. If you have biases and blind spots and agendas and politics, we're not talking about that. But we're talking about the fact that every person is subjective. Every person has eyes, every person has a mind. You have to see what you see, and that's how you define reality according to halacha. Beis Hillel says no. You have to actually go away from your own perspective and analyze the details, the nuances of the particular person or the particular aspect or circumstances, its reasons, the details, the results. That's what primarily should be established. Now, I want to explain what this means. But let's first see the answer here with Boide Moriaish. Der mit is moving the tam von sehr machleikes. Der din bei brechas aneir is ein beworchen alle aneir atshi oisul oire. Der chiyuv von der brach is nur dann, wenn man kein Hana haben. Adam hat Hana bepaul von der Meur. Der Hana kommt gleich beim der Sendem Beklolles, was damals etter stammer. Ein Licht gaven chad in der Heure. Der Rebbe halten bei Shammai, als euch der Brache darf sein auf der Brie von Klolus Eish, Meure Eish. Da kegen beis Hillel nimmt an der Schitte, als wie bald bis Beinenus in dem Eish der Zetter kamen Meure, so bepeil kommt doch da Nasser. Von der alle Gwaven in der Heure, darf der Rebbe der Nussach Abrache sein, Beure mi Eure Eish. So here's the difference. Beis Shammai knows that there are many colors in a flame, but the blessing is, as the Mishnah says, you make a blessing when you enjoy the light, or at least you could enjoy the light. So he says, the blessing is from enjoyment of the light. Now I want to ask you a question. If you need a fire to warm you up, or you need a fire to be able to see what's happening in the room, does it make a difference which color? It's red, it's yellow, it's black, it's blue, it's white light, it's black light, it's dark light. I look at a candle and I'm enjoying that there's light in the room. I'm enjoying the heat. I'm enjoying the bonfire. I'm enjoying the fireplace. I'm enjoying the light. Of course, Beis Shammai knows that there's many colors, but Beis Shammai says that's irrelevant for the halacha. The blessing, we thank Hashem, bara ma'ora eish, you gave me light. Beis Hillel says no. Remember, halacha wants you to get nuanced. Halacha wants you to dissect, to analyze, to compartmentalize. Ooh, if you look deeper into the flame, you're enjoying the fire, but you're enjoying all the colors of the flame. That's how you make a bracha. Now, let me just explain this a little deeper, because here's a big problem. The way most people read this and understand, I can't say most, many people read this and understand it is Beis Shammai, superficial. Beis Hillel, deep. You got the sikha wrong. If you think Beis Shammai is superficiality, Beis Hillel is depth, you got it wrong. I'll prove it to you. The Gemara says in a few places, who was sharper, Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel? Who was deeper? Beis Shammai. So what happens here? When the Rebbe said over the sikha, when the Rebbe said this Hadran, he said, the Alter Rebbe writes in Likutei Torah that the word Shammai comes from the word evaluation. Shuma, Hasham or Chaysav. The Gemara speaks in sight about somebody who evaluates everything. Shammai is an evaluator. So the Rebbe said Shammai was a better dissector than Hillel. Because evaluation is always about dissection and analysis. Take a look in 34. Footnote 34. Don't think Beis Shammai didn't know how to get, how to analyze. The Gemara says in Yevamis Yudalad, Beis Shammai was sharper than Beis Hillel. The Gemara even wants to know why the halacha is like Beis Hillel when Beis Shammai was sharper. Charif itvei. They were sharper. Tosfos Erev in Dafvov. So don't say Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai just looks superficially. Okay, there's a flame, red, white, yellow, black, blue. Let's go. Let's move on. Let's just look. Beis Hillel says, no. Let's deliberate. Let's go deep. He says, that's not the pshat. Beis Shammai's sharpness is targeted on discovering the general definition, the summation. Or even deeper, to find in every detail how it's really part of one cohesive picture. Now, this needs explanation, so I'm going to take a minute to explain this, the way I understand it. And I think the best way to explain it, and you'll see why I'm using this metaphor. You'll see later why I'm using this metaphor. Okay? Here's a question. I want to ask all of you a question. Whoever is listening now or replay. What captures more of a truth of a person? If I take a picture of you the way you're here, I go to the Zoom, or I go to your table, your couch, wherever you're sitting, I take a picture of you, and I have your face, I have your physique, I have your head, I have your torso, I have your body, I have your feet. Or you go to the hospital, and we take x-rays. And the x-rays show everything that's happening inside. Which do you think is more authentic, my friends? We all know the x-ray is far more authentic. A picture is just the outer, the external. The X-ray is the internal. So now I have a question. Why don't you guys put up on the walls of your dining room, kitchen, living room, family room, bedroom, X-rays of all your children, X-rays of your parents, X-rays of your grandparents? Go to the hospital, get the X-rays and hang them up on the room. Isn't that much more authentic? Don't give me a picture of my son's teeth. Take an X-ray from the dentist's office, what it really looks like. Don't give me a picture of his face. Give me an X-ray from inside. Let me see the CAT scan. Let me see the MRI. Let me see what's happening in the arms, in the legs, in the stomach. Let's see what's happening in the internal intestines. Hang that up on the wall. MS, right? You're all laughing for me. Why are you laughing? You're laughing because, yes, when you're sick, you need an X-ray. But that's not the person. The person is the picture. No, that's outside. No, that's the person. When you're sick, I need to find the infection. I need to go deeper. I need to see what's happening. You will see that this begins to explain to us what's happening here. Beis Shammai is not a superficial person. Beis Shammai says, what you see is real. That's the picture. Take a picture of the person and hang it on the wall. That's what halacha wants. And as we will see, it's because Beis Shammai is much more demanding. He's much more exacting. He's much, in many ways, more stringent from Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is, as it says in Zohar, Midas HaGvura. He's very strong. He's very principled. Beis Shammai says, what you see, that's the truth. And you know what? I could be very sharp. I know it. You're looking at a flame. Enjoy the flame. It's one flame. Beis Hillel says, we need X-rays. We need to go deeper. We need to be nuanced. Now you'll see, this is so fascinating. What I find it fascinating is because there's going to be a lot of lumdus. It's going to go into a lot of different halachas. But the way it translates into human behavior and the way it translates how we look at ourselves and we look at our children and we look at other people, and the Rebbe shows that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel have two different views of how you look at people and how you define them, is incredible. And why nowadays the halacha is only like Beis Hillel. And yet the Arizal says in the future, when Mashiach comes, the halacha is going to shift to Beis Shammai. Because Beis Shammai has a truth that Beis Hillel doesn't have. And yet, the halacha now is like Beis Hillel. So I want to explain to you what he's saying in this footnote 34. It's not that Beis Shammai is superficial. Beis Shammai is sharper. But Beis Shammai always looks in the prat and he says, I want to see the clown. I want to see the bottom line. I want to see the summation. I don't want to see X-rays. I want to get a picture of the person. That's where halacha celebrates life. That's where halacha lives. I could talk about, if I'm giving you a science class, a chemistry class about flames, I could talk about colors. Shammai has no problem, but this is halacha. Interesting, in footnote 33, the Rebbe quotes a fascinating interpretation of the Vilna Gaon. 33, Shnois Eliyahu Lahagra. The Vilna Gaon has a commentary on Mishnah, and he says, look, Beis Shammai said, Bara Moira Eish, Beis Hillel said, Boire. Why? So the Vilna Gaon says, Beis Shammai talks about Yesoid HaEish, the element of fire in its pristine source. Beis Hillel speaks about the fire that we view, that we, when we strike a match or we create a fire, we create. The element of fire only has one. The fire that we observe has many colors. That's why Beis Shammai is bara, what God creates, and Beis Hillel is boire, the fire that we constantly create. Whenever you create a fire, it's not the Yesoid HaEish, the pristine source of fire, it's the actual physical, concrete manifestation of fire in our world, in our environment. The Rebbe says it's a little difficult, this piece of the Vilna Gaon, because at the end the Gemara says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree you could say bara and boire. And the only reason Beis Hillel chose boire is because of the language of the pasuk, as he brings from Tosfos, and there's a tzlach and a Tosfos Harash, it's in 33. So based on the Vilna Gaon, there should have been a serious difference between boire and bara. Okay, but that's just, the Rebbe always likes to reference different types of interpretations in the various discussions throughout the Sikha. We finished with Seder Zerayim, at least one. We only got one. He's not doing all, he's doing one, even though there's many more. Let's go next. Se'ivav. In Seder Nashim, Meseches Ksuvas. Ooh, this is a famous argument between the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Everybody knows this. Keitzad meragdin lifnei hakala. Ksuvis, where are we? Ksuvis, Daf, Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, I think it is, right? What does 41 say? Tez Zayin, Safam at Beis, but it goes to Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph. Keitzad meragdin lifnei hakala. How do we dance before a bride? Listen to this. Beis Shammai yoimrim kala kamoy shehi. Beis Shammai says, how do you dance in front of a bride? Kala kamoy shehi. Every bride according to who she is. Lefi yoifshe v'chashivusa mekal sinoisa. Rashi says. You praise each bride according to her beauty and her prominence, her virtues, her stature, her greatness. Beis Hillel yoimrim kala nova chasuda. Beis Hillel says in front of every bride you dance and you say, she's gorgeous and gracious and kind. Beis Shammai tells Beis Hillel, I don't understand. He's just giving examples of very visible deformities. What happens if you have a person who can't see Nebuch or a person who's lame? The Torah says you're not allowed to lie. You don't call a short person tall. You don't. Why? Because you're not allowed to lie. Find the right things to say. Don't say about every single person, she's gracious and kind and he's amazing. Find what they're amazing in. But the person may actually have certain deformities. You're lying. Amnulem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel tells Beis Shammai, Lidivreichem, according to you, if somebody buys something from the marketplace and you know what? It was a lousy sale. They can't return it. So do you tell them that it's beautiful or you tell them that it's disgusting? Of course you should say it's beautiful. We all know this in life. Sometimes somebody very close to you buys something, they can't return it. And they're all proud of it and they're happy and they come to you and they say, what do you think? So do you say, it's horrible, it's disgusting. Maybe that's what you should say. You should be honest. Beis Hillel says, not what you do. You praise it. This is the argument. So Beis Shammai says, Kala kamoy shehi. Every kala, you praise according to her authentic qualities. Find who she is, what she excels in, and talk about that. Beis Hillel says, no, there's a generic text for every wedding. She's beautiful, she's gorgeous, and she's gracious. Beis Shammai accuses Beis Hillel of exaggeration and lying. It's deception. You're being politically correct. Midvar sheker techak, stop lying. Beis Hillel tells Beis Shammai, we do it all the time. People buy things, you don't like it, you still say it's nice. Asks the Rebbe, asks the Lubavitcher Rebbe, es ist doch poshet, as euch Leut Beis Hillel is frandet zivui midvar sheker techak. Und as euch Leut Beis Shammai is b'shas eine kauft am Mekach, darf man es farim meshabeach sein. I don't understand. Beis Shammai holds you allowed to lie? I'm sorry, Beis Hillel holds you allowed to lie? Beis Shammai is asking a good question. You're not allowed to lie. Why lie? If a person is not gorgeous, they're not beautiful, why say it? If a person is not known for their graciousness and kindness and super benevolence, why say it? Why lie? Find something else to say. Does Beis Hillel really believe that truth doesn't matter? You just say the right thing to make everybody feel good and look good. And according to Beis Shammai, does he really believe that if somebody buys something from the marketplace and he can't return it or she can't return it, you should say, oh wow, you wasted all your money. This was the stupidest thing you ever did. This was a really foolish sale. Is that what Beis Shammai holds? No. Nor euch da is the hesbid as again l'shitasa. They're following their shita, their view. Beis Shammai halt mit auf allemal annehmen der Sache, wie sie setzt ist gleichheit in klolles dicken Blick. Und jeis as bei otter kala. Seinen Ort, die Meiles von Avachasude nicht ansendig. Hat kein Ort nicht, ich zum Kala sein mir die Meiles, nor wie mir seid gleich, Kala kamoy shehi. Und bei Hillel halten l'shitosam, as man darf nehmen in Betracht de Protem. Wie mir seid sie bei his Beinenus. Jeis as der Chassen lokach mekach. Et ausgeklieben hat die Kalle, is abschittes, als in seinen Augen ist ja nove Chasude. Und al pisa jumtek de hemschich mikan, omru chachamam lo'olam, teit eiter schlodem ureves im Abrius, von dem sieht man, als wie bald als ein der Jessein Shabbos, muss man jeden einem Schatzen leut sein, basunder der. V'al derech al todin es chavercha at shetagia lim koimoi b'chol hapirushim shebemokim. Und durch dem kommt man so, als man wird me'urev afile im abriyes. Bemeile is euch moven, als ladas besil is nicht kein Sheker. Warum noch der is beinenus beprati is et man als bejachas so ad dem chasen is itaka kalanova chasuda. Ma schenkenlich bei Shammai. Ad de klal is dike gedere is keveya, kemmen einfach gegeres besummen nicht sagen kalanova chasuda. Und meile geht es rein in gedder von mit war Sheker tirchak. The explanation is as follows. Beis Shammai holds, halacha says, you accept the reality of something the way it's perceived from a general perspective. You don't do x-rays in halacha unless you have to. There's certain situations. But generally, the way your mind, your eyes grasp it from a general perspective, you take a picture of somebody, that's what they look like, that's who they are. That's what Beis Shammai says. That's how halacha asks of you to define reality. Now, in this bride or this groom, these particular qualities are not visible. The Gemara uses qualities. The Gemara speaks about challenges that are visible. There's a reason for it, because my eye tells me, I'm sorry. It would be a compliment that from my perspective is dishonest. So the Beis Shammai says, Kala kamay shehi, find the virtues to talk about. Beis Hillel doesn't say you lie. Beis Hillel says as follows. We do take x-rays. We do analyze. We do dissect. We do tune into the details, to the various factors. Let's think about this. Why is there a wedding now? This groom took this bride as his wife. She is for him his soulmate. He wants to spend Be'ezer Hashem the rest of his life with her. In his eyes, she's gracious. She's the most gracious person in the world. She's the most beautiful person in the world. As he brings 44 star, the Gemara in Saita Daf Mem Zayin Amar Aleph, what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Shalish Chinois Hein. There's three things that we have such graceful feelings towards. The place you live. If you live in New York, it's my place, New York. Other people think it's horrible, but for you, New York, and for this one, LA, for this one, Miami, whatever it is, this is my place. Your coat, your computer, your car. Somebody else may have a nicer one, but it's mine. And then there's Chen Isha al Baila. The grace that a woman has in her husband's eyes. She's mine, and that's what makes her the most beautiful. She's mine and I'm hers. And that's why the Gemara continues and says, Mikan, from here the sages learned that you have to be integrated with people. Your mind, your perception, your das has to be mu'ureves. It has to be mixed up with people. What does this mean? What this means is that you have to get to know people. People have different perspectives. Ain't they say in Shabbos, no two people look alike, and no two people think alike, and no two people have the same struggles, and no two people have the same way of looking at the world. And you have to start evaluating each person from his or her paradigm and perspective. What does the Mishnah say? Don't judge a person until you do not reach their place. Who says it? Hillel. Footnote 46, Avos, Perik Beis, Hillel says, Al Todines Chaver Chachadagilim Kaima. You can't judge somebody until you don't reach his space. And the Rebbe says space doesn't only mean physical space. Space includes every concept of space. I cannot judge you until I do not know where you live, until I don't understand your space, until I can't tune into your space. And space again means geographical space, psychological space, existential space, spiritual place, physical place, emotional space. And then you could learn how to be integrated even with brios, even with simple creatures. But you have to understand people. So Beis Hillel is not telling you to lie. When you say Kala Nova Chasudi, he's just telling you, you came to this person's wedding. Can you take off your own glasses at the wedding and put on the chassan's glasses and dance in front of the Kala and say, she's the most gorgeous, gracious person in the world. And dance in front of the chassan and say he's the most handsome, amazing guy in the world. Because for this Kala and for this chassan, that's the truth. But for this, you have to strip yourself from your own paradigm. Maybe you would have not chosen this Kala or this chassan. I hope not. There's one Kala and one chassan. You'll choose somebody else. But for this chassan, she's everything. Of course she's Kalanova Chasuda. I'm not lying, Beis Hillel says. Beis Shammai says, the geder, the klol is the kegeder. What establishes in halacha reality is not the x-rays, not the details, not the nuances, what you see. I can't say Kalanova Chasuda. For Beis Shammai, this is a lie. For Beis Shammai's world, it's a lie. And we're getting a little deeper into Beis Shammai with each step, because things are going to become clear that Beis Shammai actually, Beis Shammai actually doesn't believe in x-rays, not because he doesn't believe in x-rays, but because Beis Shammai could live in a world where the outer and the inner are always synchronized. So the outer tells you the whole story of reality. That's how Beis Shammai lived. And that's how he believes halacha determines reality. See it, and that's what it is. And in every detail, you could see the klal. And understand the klal. This is a lie, sorry. They're not arguing if you're allowed to lie. They're arguing how halacha defines reality. Let's go to the next step. Here, the argument changes, completely different realm, the laws of nida. The laws of a woman during her cycle. Ader l'shitasi v'spiegelt sich up in the pluktes from Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Wird noch mehr begründet. Von Moven durch dem, was wir gefunden haben, l'shitasi Beis Shammai und Hillel allein. Und das ist in zwei Fallen, wo der Lishitasi ist mudgish b'miyuchad. Im ersten Fall ist der Hadgash in dem, was zu lieb dem Lishitasi ist Shammai lekula und Hillel lechumra behepach von seiner Schitte bechlal. Und im zweiten ist das mudgish durch Meiser, aber sie haben sich Shammai wie Hillel allein geführt bei Meiser b'peil. We have now two other examples. But here it becomes even more emphatic, because in the first case we see Shammai will be lenient and Hillel will be stringent. Usually Shammai was stringent, Hillel was lenient. The fact that they can reverse their views shows how attached Shammai was to this worldview. He's even ready to defy his norm and become lenient. That's how deep this worldview is pervasive. He's not just always stringent or always lenient. Real people are not that way. Real people have a paradigm that for them is really authentic, and that's how they live. That's their trajectory. And Hillel and Shammai here transform their regular opinions. The second case is also fascinating because it's about a story. It's about a story of Shammai and Hillel. You don't only see what they preached, you see how they lived. It's called Meiser Rav. The Gemara says the strongest thing is a Meiser, when you have a story how they actually lived. Not just their school, not just their students, not just what they taught, but Shammai and Hillel themselves. Here we go. In Seder Nezikin Mesechta Edius lernen wir. Shammai yomer, kol hanoshim dayan shaton, v'Hillel mipkida lipkida, afilu liyamim harbe. Shammai sagt, als ein Isch, was ist reue Dame, sie mit Hamitaris, was sie redet von der Ehe und weiter, aber nicht, was sie hat angerührt vor der Ehe. Hillel sagt, dass sie ist mit Hamitaris, was sie hat angerührt von sind noch der letzte Teuer, dicke bedicke. Und die Gemara ist maßbar in dem ersten Tam, Shammai kassover hamid Yishal cheskasse, wie sie becheskes Teure medes. V'Hillel amar, v'Hillel ki amar hamid over al cheskasse, heiche de les leideis amigufe. Aval Isis kiven de migufa kachazia leamrin and ukma chaskasa. Okay, this is an argument between Shammai and Hillel in the beginning of Meseches Edius and in the beginning of Meseches Nida. What is the argument? The argument is as follows. If a woman, and we're talking about a woman who doesn't have a fixed time for her cycle, her monthly menstrual cycle, Shammai says, a woman suddenly checks and she sees blood. So he says, Dayan Shaitan. You assume that the impurity began from that moment when she checked. So let's say yesterday, she touched truma, she touched holy food, or she touched a carbon, a holy sacred offering. It doesn't become tameh. She's now a nida, she's in the cycle, and that creates an impurity until the cycle is over and she goes to the mikveh. But Shammai says, I understand. But Dayan Shaitan, it's enough to say that right now, she is tameh until she becomes tar. You don't have to go back retroactively to yesterday. Hillel said no. you go back to the last time she examined herself. He's much more stringent. So let's say she checked herself for blood on Sunday. On Wednesday, she checked herself a second time, and Wednesday she saw blood. Sunday she didn't. So even Monday and Tuesday, whatever she touched, if it was holy food, it became impure. Why? Because Hillel says you don't know. She examined herself on Sunday, so we know that till Sunday everything was good. But she didn't check herself till Wednesday. So maybe it started Monday, maybe it started Sunday night, maybe it started Tuesday morning, I don't know. So Beis Hillel says be stringent, and anything that she may have touched that could have become impure between mipkida lipkida, from one examination to another examination, you have to assume that it's tameh. That's what Beis Hillel holds. That's the argument. Asks the Gemara in Nida Daf Beis, on the bottom of the page, what's the logic behind the argument? So the Gemara says as follows. Shammai says, listen, there's something called in halacha a chazakah. What's a chazakah? Chazakah means the presumed state of a person. That's what chazakah means. Presumed state based on what she was previously. Maintain the status quo. In other words, a woman generally, yes, a woman has a cycle, but generally we don't assume that she's bleeding. A woman can consider herself pure until the cycle begins. So Beis Shammai says, Hamid Isha al Chaskasa, this is what the Gemara says. Presume her state based on what she was previously. So Beis Shammai says, now she examined herself, she sees there's blood. But yesterday, I'm going to presume that there was no blood. I don't have a reason to say there was blood. Go back and presume that she remains in the same state based on what she was previously until that status quo is defied based on certainty. So therefore he says, yesterday I don't think there was blood and we could keep everything pure. Hillel argues. He says, no. Chazakah works. Say, let her maintain the status quo. Let's attribute to her the presumed state based on what she was previously. That's true if there was no reyes migufe. If the only change would come from an external factor. But let's understand that a woman naturally, every single month, there's something that happens in the blood. The uterus breaks and gets dissolved and therefore there's blood. It's something that comes migufa. She sees it because of dynamics in her own body. So this is a change that's happening naturally. It's expected to happen and it happens from within. So therefore Beis Hillel says, I can't assume the status quo that she's pure. And I say, till the last examination, when I know for sure she was pure, I assume it's tameh. What's the argument? Beis Shammai doesn't know about the biological dynamics. Says the Rebbe does that in themselves kaven. It's not based on practical arguments of reality. Everybody knew what the other one knew. It's based on how halacha, how Jewish law determines how we view reality in terms of Jewish law. Shammai halt, as me guckt auf a Sach, wie sie setzt sich oder setzt sich nicht. Here it setzt sich nicht. Gleich vor der Augen. Und der Vater ist da gescheit. Das Mann von Rie ist dann bepeulen und tefrier, weil es ist nicht gewinnt kein Rie. Und man stellt sie drüber auf der Chazak. Hillel halt aber, als man benugen sich nicht mit einer Freues bechlal. No man darf es scheuke sein Protein, was raus Saddam. A das, was raus ist scheite, das am Mesuvev. Weil es ist da reise beguffe. Die Sache von der Ehe ist an Indien TV bei Anisha. Und man hat Time kämen sie nicht stellen bei Cheskes Tare. Und die Tare sind ein Tommy Misofakal Kalpana. Briefly, Shammai holds you look at something the way it is, the way it's seen by you or not seen by you in front of your eyes. A woman now started to bleed, she examined herself and she sees there's blood. Dayashait, this is what you look at. Yesterday, I have no reason to say there was blood. Maybe there was. But she didn't see it yesterday. She saw it today when she examined herself. So therefore I can go back to the Chazakah and I say she's presumed to be pure. Now you see it. Now the status changed. Now she's tummy. Now she's a nida. Beis Hillel says we take X-rays. We don't allow ourselves, which means it's insufficient with what your eyes see. Investigation, scrutiny, dissection, analysis, details. Why did she see blood? She just saw blood randomly? No. There's a reyes begufa. It's a part of the biological clock of a woman. It's part of how God created her body. If that's the case, So you can't just say she's becheskes tarer, she's presumed to be in a state of purity because something randomly may have happened. Now, it's not random. This is a natural process that happens in every month, and you're not sure when. Remember, this is talking about a woman who doesn't have a fixed cycle, doesn't have a vesses. So therefore, Beis Hillel says, you got to go back all the way to the previous examination. They're not arguing in the facts, they're arguing how halacha studies facts. Beis Shammai wants the bottom line, the summation, what I see. Ein of Rayas, what I see. She's not Kalanova Chasuda. Sorry, I find other compliments. Fire? It's one fire. It lights up my house, it warms up my house. Bara Ma'ira Eish. Yes, there's many colors, but that's not what halacha is concerned with. Bara Ma'ira Eish. I see a flame, and the flame is one flame. Here, I see blood. That's it. Yesterday, I didn't see blood. So you see blood now. Yesterday, I didn't see blood. I go back to a chazaka. I assume she's pure. Yesterday, she was pure. Beis Hillel says, no, get deeper, understand the dynamics. That's what halacha looks at. Now it becomes even more clear from the next story. Ches, Oichin Seder Moed, Mesechta Shabbos. Zet men odem unterscheiden die Shittas von Shammai und Hillel und die drei fallen wegen Anochi, was gekommen sich mit Geier sein. Wow, this is the big story. In ein Fall hat Anochi gesagt, Geireni al Menashe Tlamdeni, nor Teire Shebeksav. In zweiten Fall hat gesagt, Geireni al Menashe Tlamdeni, kol Teire Kula, Kshani Yemel Regelachs. In dritten Fall hat gesagt, Geireni al Menashe Tessimeni Koin Godel. Und in die alle drei Fallen ist Shammai hat sie Deuche gewinnt und Hillel hat sie Mekabel und Megeier gewinnt. Ist doch nicht Muvan mit Mann of Shech. Let's remember the story. Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph Shabbos 31a. What's the story? The story is there were 3 Gentiles who came to Shammai. Each one had a different story. The first one said, I want to convert, but I'm only accepting the written Torah, not the oral tradition. The second one says, I want to convert, but I need you to teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one leg, on one foot. The third one said, I'm ready to convert if I could become the high priest. Shammai rejected all 3. He pushed them away. Why? That's not conversion. A convert who says, I don't accept half of Torah. A convert who says, I need to become the high priest. A convert who says, I only have 30 seconds. You can give me a crash course in 30 seconds. Sorry, that's not conversion. Hillel, not Beis Hillel. Hillel accepted them. The Gemara says the 3 people met. They all converted to Judaism. And they said, the stringency of Shammai would have thrown us away from the world. The benevolence, the humility, the piety of Hillel brought us close to the Shechina. Asks the Rebbe, I don't understand. Is the Chnit moving with Manavshach? Wie bald ist dort der Klall, als man darf sich abhalten von Mekabel sein Gerim in a leichte Neufen. Und befragt, als der Handel sich wegen Gerim, was sagen klar, als geht es. Is Almenas, was ist a Tnaische Leuke, die Boi und Beschassene, kommt sich mit Geier sein, bechtet zu der Griechen durch dem Aschrode, bekeit zu besäen. Oder ist nicht Mekabel, ob sich gar nicht teilt, ist man ihm nicht Mekabel. Heint, wie sagt sich Hillel Mekabel gewinnt? Und bei den Gerim ist der Kabbalah's Gerim ja gewinnt, die Boi. Und wie man sagt, Taka Perla, sie seien geworden, Emesse Gerim. Wie kommt es, was Shammai hat sich abgestoppt? Die Hasbara ist Kinis Kalel. Bei Shammai, Lishitas, hat Machri gewinnt, dem Ein of Roi ist Bechlal. Die Klall ist die Kamashmaus von seiner Rede und Eufen Kabbalah's Ageres. Und wie bald das ist nicht die Boi, hat der Fall sich durchgewinnen. Hillel aber Lishitas hat dann gewinnen in Indien, Leute praten, bis Sibois Adibur. Und hat gesehen, dass die alle Gehen wollen sich mit Geier sein mit an Emes. Und das, was Dibur ist, Benussach Hanal ist es zu lieber seichtigen Tam, es fällt sie in Jediyah begeder de Kohen Gadol the Kayetze Basa. The whole thing doesn't make sense. We know that a convert has to accept the whole Torah. We also know that we don't try to accept converts just because somebody says, I want to convert. It's not an Indian. In fact, we try to persuade them otherwise. Here, the converts came and clearly said that they're not ready. They were making all types of conditions that are completely inconsistent with Judaism. If somebody comes and says, I'm becoming a convert so that you should make me the high priest, or I'm becoming a convert but I'm not accepting Torah, I'm not ready to accept the whole Torah, I'm not even ready to learn, I have only one leg to stand on, 40 seconds, teach it to me. You don't accept them. So how can Hillel accept them? So you're going to say that no, they were genuine. They weren't serious with these stipulations. So why did Shammai reject them? He didn't know how to read people. And you see at the end, they became converts and they were authentic. So Hillel was right. So what was Shammai's perspective? The Rebbe says, again, this has to do with 2 worldviews. Beis Shammai doesn't take x-rays in halacha. Not because x-rays don't don't exist, not because they're lies. Beis Shammai actually, here is where you see Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says, what a person says, that's what I take seriously. What my eyes see, what my ears hear, that's real. I listen to what they're saying and how they want to become converts. And you know what? They said the wrong thing. This one wants to be Kohen Gadol. This one wants to learn the whole Torah on one foot. This one doesn't accept Torah Shebaal Peh. I'm sorry, I can't accept them. Beis Shammai says the truth is what you see. The truth is, this is what they're saying. This is how halacha has to treat them. They're not ready for conversion. I'm sorry. Go find another religion. You're not for Judaism. It's a very serious thing, Judaism. What does Hillel do? Hillel says, you know what? You actually have to analyze them. And you have to see what is behind their words. Sometimes people are not expressing themselves correctly. Sometimes people's words can eclipse their true intentions. Now you get to understand that Beis Shammai is not superficial. Beis Shammai in a way is deeper. Beis Shammai says, you know what? People's words should not eclipse their intentions. People should be worked out. Beis Hillel says, people are complicated. I'm looking at these three converts and I'm listening to them. And I know the truth. They want to be real converts. But you know what? They have blockages. They have different issues that are unresolved. Maybe one of them doesn't understand what a Kohen Gadol is. Maybe one of them doesn't really get the nuances of Judaism. He has to be taught. He thinks he can have it on one foot. Maybe one of them doesn't know what Torah Shebaal Peh is. You know, sometimes people come to me and they say, oh, the rabbis invented all these laws. I don't follow the rabbis. They're corrupt. They don't know what Torah Shebaal Peh is. They don't know about the immune system of Torah Shebaal Peh. They don't know about the integrity of Torah Shebaal Peh. I could reject them. I could say, oh, it's kfira. Beis Hillel says, sorry. No. Analyze. Take an x-ray. Look what's happening and you'll see people are complicated. People are nuanced. Yes, people are complex. They're saying one thing and they mean something else. That's Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says that's not how halacha works. We're going to see later why the halacha is like Beis Hillel, because Beis Shammai is talking about a much more perfect and true world. That's why I said Beis Shammai in a way is deeper than Beis Hillel. But his depth is a different type of depth. Beis Hillel's depth is nuanced. It's compartmentalized. It's dissected. It's seeing different parts of people. Beis Hillel sees dissonance. They're saying one thing, they mean something else. They may not even understand what is going on inside of them. I see three authentic people who really want to be Jewish. I'm going to make them Jewish. And you know what? He was right, because they wanted to be Jewish. Beis Shammai wasn't rejecting halacha. For Beis Shammai, that's not how halacha works. For Beis Shammai, halacha works in a way, you see it, you hear it, and that's how you define it. That's real. That's real. The picture that you take from a person and you put on the wall, that is the person. And therefore, Beis Shammai says, now I keep on saying Beis Shammai. Here it's Shammai. It's not Beis Shammai, it's Shammai. Shammai rejected them. Next, now we come to another one. Fascinating argument. I'm going to say it inside. Tess. Say the Kachim, Mesechta Chulin. We already did Zerayim, Bayre Mereish. We did Mayid, remember? What do we do in Mayid? Chagigah is Mayid, but we also did one more in Mayid, the story with the three converts. We did Nashim, right? We did Nashim. Did we do Nashim? Meseches Ksuvas, the Chassan and the Kala. We did Nezikin. We did Adius, which is also Tarais, because we did the woman with Nida, and now we do Kachim, Meseches Chulin. Ha'oif oile magvina ala shulchan, ve'einei nechel, divrei Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, emrim lo yoyle v'lei nechel. Beis Shammai halten as mezet izach. What's the halacha? Are you allowed to put on one table chicken with cheese? Beis Shammai says no problem. You're not allowed to eat chicken and cheese. Biblically, you're allowed to eat chicken and cheese because chicken is not meat. But the rabbis prohibited chicken and they treated it as meat, so we don't eat chicken with milk. We know that. We don't eat chicken with milchiks. But could you put it on one table? Beis Shammai says, yeah, put it on one table, don't eat it. Beis Hillel is more stringent. Here again, Beis Hillel is stringent. He says, don't bring it up on the table and don't eat it. What's the argument? What's the argument? They both hold you're not allowed to eat chicken and milk. Why does Beis Shammai say, put it on the table? Beis Hillel says, don't put it on the table. Why? What are they arguing about? Usually Beis Shammai is strict, but here Beis Shammai is lenient. So he's not following his regular view. He's always more stringent. What happened here? Oh, now we understand. Beis Shammai halt als Mesechta Zach das heraufbringen auf den Tisch, kemoishu, wie das ist für sich. Und es ist nicht doch nicht Chash, ist es heraufbringen an Euf auf den Tisch zusammen mit der Gewinner. Beis Shammai says, I look at something the way it is, the way it appears. That's the real truth from the halachic point of view. Bringing up chicken, putting chicken on a table with his cheese, there's no problem. That's not forbidden. Just look at the fact. The man put chicken on the table where there is also pizza or cheese, a cheesecake. Just look at what happened. Is there any problem? No. Just look at this act independently. There's no problem. Having chicken on the same table like cheese is not an issue. Problem is eating them, consuming them together. Beis Hillel Beis Hillel follows his view. As medav sich misbeinen seinen Pratim. Benidende dan als Sibbe von am Mesuvev, was wird der von herauskommen. Beis Hillel says, look at everything not just in a self-contained way, see it also as a cause for factors that are going to evolve from it. Look at both things. Look at what it is a result from and what will result from it. In other words, contextualize it in the entire, look at the whole spectrum from the beginning to the end. Yes, scrutinize. Look what happened before. Look what's going to happen after. That Aruf bringen auf den Tisch is asibitz am Mesuvev. One of the Baal does Yitzhak lev Adam Ram in Urev is oib mevet mate sein Aruf bringen beide zusammen auf den Tisch is achshash as durch dem wird es safe on eben essen zusammen. Ah, I know putting chicken on the table with pizza is not a problem. I know, but I always look at what's the next step. What's the result? What are the ramifications? Yes, I analyze the details. Let's understand. Once it's on the table, a person's yetzer, people have addictions, people have inclinations, people are sometimes very instinctive and impulsive. Yetzer lev adam ramin urav. That's who we are. We're weak people. We're frail. So what happens? I'm a little hungry, and they're both on the table together. Maybe I'm going to forget. Maybe I'm not going to forget, but ultimately I'll eat them together. Beis Hillel again. He goes deeper. What do I mean deeper? He dissects the details. He looks at everything, not just for what it is, but for where it came from and where it may be going. When the Rebbe said the Hadran in Yiddish, the Rebbe said, Beis Hillel sagt. Beis Hillel says, why did he put it on the table? He doesn't want to eat it. Is the Chasimin is a baltaiva? That's what the Rebbe said. A simin is a baltaiva. This is a guy who has issues with food. He loves food. He's a shtickle glutton. It's a baltaiva. What do I mean is a baltaiva? Why does it, you're eating cheese. Why do you need chicken on the table? You're eating chicken. Why do you have milk on the table? The guy likes food to be around. He's a baltaiva. Ooh, so even though this is not forbidden, once you're a baltaiva, what's going to happen? You know, nobody eats one piece of potato chips, right? Unless you're really disciplined. You don't eat one piece of chocolate, right? There's one piece, there's a second piece. Are you not supposed to eat the second piece of chocolate? But it's there. So Beis Hillel says, sorry, no bringing up chicken on the same table like milchiks. Next machloikas. I'm going to say this machloikas outside. This is Seder Tarais, laws of purity. We already did one about the woman with Nida, that was from Nida, but here's another one. And there's many examples, but the Rebbe says we're going to choose one from Seder Tarais. What's the one from Seder Tarais? This is Sif Yud in the Sikha. I'm going to say it outside. There's a Mishnah Meseches Kelim, Perik Chav Ches, chapter 28 of Kelim. It speaks about mitbechos svarim, which means covers of scrolls. They didn't have books like we have today. It says before the printing press. You're talking about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So you're talking about Shammai and Hillel lived in the 1st century after the Common Era, before the Common Era. And the school of Shammai and Hillel lived during that time. This is many, many years before printing, before the 15th century when printing was developed in Italy. But mitpechei svarim means covers of scrolls. So Beis Shammai says, whether they're decorated or not decorated, they become tameh. If a dead weasel touches these coverings, these covers of the scrolls, they become tameh. Beis Hillel says, no, if they're not decorated, they're tameh. If they're decorated, they're pure. They remain tahor. If they're not decorated, they're just simple coverings, they become tameh. If they're decorated, they remain tahor. Unlike Beis Shammai. What's the argument? What's the argument? So the Rogatchover Gaon, as he brings, explains the machloikas based on a Ravid. And the key is, there's two concepts. There's something called a tik and something called a chipui. Which means, a tik is, you're using this covering to protect the scroll. You simply want to protect it. So it's something that the person needs. I'm trying to protect the scroll from theft, or from mice, or from other insects or lizards, or from climate change, the weather, whatever it is, certain part of the house, there may be leaks. I'm trying to protect it. So in other words, it's here for me. The covering is called Meshamshei Adam. It's a utensil that's used by a person, because I want that book. And the halacha is that a utensil that a person uses is susceptible to tumah. But if you have a cover that's not there to protect the book, it's just for decorative purposes, I'm not gaining anything out of it. The book is gaining something out of it. So it's not tameh. That's what the Rogatchover explains, based on a Ravid. In other words, a vessel is tameh only because it serves a person. Because really, tumah relates to a person. A living animal can't become tameh. A person becomes tameh. Tumah is based on a higher level of holiness, there's more tumah. If the utensil is for a person, I'm trying to protect my book, yeah. But if it's just decoration for the book needs it. Right, as one of the commentaries say, ain't tachshet lekeli, right? We don't put jewelries. Jewelry is for people, not for books. You want to put jewelry on a book, it's for the book, but it's not makabel tumah. So the Rebbe says, so what's the argument? Now we'll understand the argument. When you have decorated covers of scrolls, it's made for beauty. So Beis Hillel said, if it's made for beauty, it doesn't become tameh. If it's not decorated, it's just made for protection. So then it is tameh. So the Rebbe says as follows. Now we can understand the idea. Beis Shammai always says, you look at something from a general perspective. You look at it holistically. You see what it is, the way your eye grasps the reality, that is the reality, in a holistic, general fashion. We don't start taking x-rays. So now, when you see a book has a covering, a scroll, whether it's decorated or not decorated, we don't analyze. Both of them are ultimately helping the book, helping the scroll. They're protecting the scroll, that's the fact. They're covering the scroll, so it becomes tameh. Beis Hillel says, no, take an x-ray. Take a look at the designs. Take a look at the decorations. This shows you there's a different purpose. The decorated scrolls, their job is for the beauty. That's called chipui. It's bottled to the keli. It doesn't have a geder of a keli. It's just to decorate the keli. So it's not tameh. But if it's not decorated, this is not for decoration. This is not for beauty. It's a tik. It's to protect it. It's to protect the keli, so it becomes tameh. It also seems like when it's there to protect the keli, it has on it the level of a keli. When it's just there for beauty, it's just like an extension of the keli, so therefore it's not tameh. And indeed, here too we see that Rabbi Eliezer holds like Beis Shammai. The Chacham hold like Beis Hillel. Again, the same idea that Rabbi Eliezer followed Beis Shammai, the Chachamim followed Beis Hillel. Based on all of this, let's see. Based on all of this, let's come back to the end of Mesechta Chagigah. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's come back to the end of Mesechta Chagigah and all will become clear. And we'll understand the view of the Rambam. The argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim at the end of Chagigah follows these two views of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Rambam holds that Rabbi Eliezer, who was a student of Beis Shammai, and the rabbis arguing with him, are following the world views of Shammai and Hillel, of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's why the Rambam learns the Gemara the way he learned it, because the Rambam didn't just see arguments as isolated arguments. The Rambam put arguments in context. He saw the arguments as manifestations of the shittas, of the ashkafas of Shammai and Hillel. So when the Rambam can explain an argument as part of that way of looking how Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel understood life and halacha, he'll put it that way. That's why the Rambam chooses his explanation. Now let's understand. Rebbe Eliezer holds that the tzipui, the covering of the Mizbeach, would make it tameh. You know why? Because what you see is what you get. This is called a copper Mizbeach. And every detail of this Mizbeach is called a detail of Mizbeach HaNechoshes, or Mizbeach HaZav. This is a copper altar, it's a golden altar. Copper and gold are Makabel Tumah. We know that it's only the plating, it's only the covering. And under it, there's something else. And if under it there's something else, therefore, maybe the halachas should be redefined. Rebbe Eliezer says no. Since the way you look at the Mizbeach, what do you see? You see gold and you see copper. And even if you look at the details, every detail of the Mizbeach is gold or copper. They're Makabel Tumah. And therefore, if the Torah wouldn't clearly say that this is like earth, it would be Makabel Tumah. That's Rebbe Eliezer view. Because this follows the view of Shammai. The Chachamim hold, you don't need the Mizbeach to be compared to earth. You're right. It's called copper. It's called gold. These are metals. That's true. But if you get into the X-ray level, if you get into a deeper level, it's just a cover. And a cover is always subservient to that which is under the cover. And therefore, that takes precedence over the klal. According to Beis Shammai, there's a klal, there's the general picture, and there are the details. The general picture triumphs over the details. The general picture, this is gold and copper. So if this is gold and copper, Rebbe Eliezer says, it should become tameh. It's only a cover, but that cover is what stands out. I don't take a picture, I don't hang up x-rays on my home's wall, on the walls of my home. I hang up the cover, the outer cover. The Chachamim say, no, Beis Hillel. I know there's a cloud, there's a general picture, but there's the details. And that's what takes precedent in halacha. So therefore, I don't need a special limud from a pasuk that the Mizbeach can't become tamei because it's earth. No! Mipnei shem etzupim, as the Rambam says. These are just covers. And covers don't define the keli. And the keli doesn't have access to the tumah. The tzipui itself doesn't become tamei because it's subservient. It doesn't have real significance. And the keli itself is not tamei because it didn't come in contact with the tumah, like we learned before from the Sifra, the Torah's Kohanim. And therefore the Rambam says the argument fits beautifully with the general views of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel throughout Mishnaic and Gemara, and with the views, because Rebbe Eliezer follows Shamuti, Rebbe Eliezer follows Shammai, and the Chachamim here follow Beis Hillel. So the Rambam sees this argument as just a continuation of that argument that pervades so many, not all, but so many of their arguments in Shas. This is another one. And the Rebbe brings in footnote 66 another argument that's mamish like this one. Mishnah Ohalois, chapter 11. Amazing argument, Mishnah Ohalois. Footnote 66, I'm going to say it very briefly. We all know that if a person dies, God forbid, anything that's under that roof becomes tameh. What happens if the person dies in a room and there's a door that goes into the other room? If that door is open, if there's an opening to go into the other room, the tumah travels. But if that opening is stuffed up, the tumah doesn't travel. It's like a wall. How much opening does there have to be? Paiseach tefach. You need an opening of a handbreadth, and then the tumah could travel into the other room. What happens, asks the Mishnah, if a person is lying in that opening? A person is lying in that opening. Beis Shammai says the person blocks the tumah. Beis Hillel says no. If you look inside of a person, you'll see there's a cavity, there's openness in the person, there's an emptiness, a chalal in the person, and it's a tefach. So therefore the tumah goes through the person. What's the argument here? The Rebbe says pashut. Beis Shammai looks at a person. This is where I got the X-ray example from. Beis Shammai looks at a person. He sees a person. A person is not a cavity. A person is an entity. A person is one big entity. You block the tumah. Beis Hillel says, no. Take an X-ray. There's flesh. There's skin. But under it, there's a chalol tefach. There's openness. So the tumah travels. Who's right? They're both right. It's a different way of looking at a person. If I take an X-ray, I see what's under the skin, what's under the flesh. You see what's happening internally. If you don't take an X-ray, a person is just one big barrier, one mitzias, one gush, one shtick flesh. It's not a cholol. There's no open space here of a tefach. Beis Hillel says, no, the pnimius of a person is a cholol. Yes, we take X-rays. We look at the details. We get into the nuances. We look at the pratim, not at the klal and halacha. Beis Hillel knows what Beis Shammai is saying, but it's a way of how halacha defines reality. The same is true with the Mizbeach. Rebbe Lezer, he sees the covering. That defines the reality. And that's why it should become tameh. That's his view. The Torah says it's like karka, so it doesn't become tameh. Chachamim say, no, mipnei shehei mitzupim. I don't look at the covering. I look what's under the covering. I look what's happening on a deeper level, on a more nuanced level. I dissect, I analyze. That's what I did with Kalanova Chasuda. That's what I did with the converts. That's what I did with the flame. That's what I did with the woman who's a nida. That's what I did with the chicken and the fish and the cheese. That's what I did with the covering of the scrolls. I analyzed what the cover looked like. It's not just protecting the scroll, it's decorated. That's what I do. That's what I do here too. I'm not looking at the cover. Oh, if you're looking at the Mizbeach itself, the Mizbeach itself is not going to get tameh because the tumah didn't touch it. And I should just add, as he says in 67, there are those who explain the Rambam that the reason it doesn't get tameh is because it's klei eitz ha'asuyin lanachas, and the covering is bottled to the klei eitz ha'asuyin lanachas, like we explained before. It's the same idea, as he explains in 67. That the tzipuy is bottled to that which is inside. That's the key. Rashi has a different shita. Rashi says, "Mipnei shehei mitzupim," right? That Rebbe Lezer would have been metame because it's mitzupah, so therefore you don't look at the klei eitz asul lenachas, but the tzipuy is bottled. And since the tzipuy is bottled, so therefore the Chachamim say it's a klei eitz asul lenachas. The tzipuy is a reason to be metame, right? The tzipuy would be a reason to be metame, but it's klei eitz asul lenachas, so the tzipuy is bottled. It also brings out the same point. But according to the Rambam, it's even more emphasized that the whole shitta of the Chachamim is that the tzipuy is a reason to be metayer because it's completely not significant on its own. According to this, we come back to the beginning of Mesechta Chagigah. What's the beginning of Mesechta Chagigah? The beginning of Mesechta Chagigah is, there's an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Fascinating argument. There were two offerings that the Jews brought when they went up Yom Tov. When they went up Yom Tov to the Beis HaMikdash, there was an Oilas Re'iyah and a Chagigah. An Oilas Re'iyah is the carbon oila that was for Hashem. It was burnt on the altar completely. Chagigah was burnt on the altar, parts of it, but the rest was eaten by the Kohanim and the owners. Beis Shammai says the Re'iyah has to be more expensive. 2 moyas of silver. The Chagigah 1. Beis Hillel says the opposite. The Re'iyah is less expensive, the Chagigah is more. Why? So the Gemara explains in Chagigah Davav that Beis Shammai holds that the Re'iyah is more significant because it all goes to God. So it has to be more expensive. The Chagigah also goes to people. So it's less expensive. Beis Hillel says no. Chagigah adifat is b'shtei achilas. The Chagigah is better because there's 2 consumptions. Hashem eats it, the altar, but also people eat it. What's the argument? Beis Hillel doesn't agree that that which is for God is more significant than that which is for people. He disagrees with Beis Shammai. So the Rebbe says, no, it's the same argument. According to Beis Shammai, you look at the carbon generally. You have a re'iyah, it gets completely consumed on the altar. It's a carbon oila. That's more significant, it's more valuable, it's more holy than that which only partially goes to God. So that's why the Re'iyah you spend more money on. It's more valuable, it's more sacred. But if you go more details, it's the other way around. Beis Hillel says, Adarabah. The second achila of the Chagigah is in the same category of Beis Shammai. It's also achilas gavaya. Why are we eating it? It's not just people eating meat, people eating steak. They're doing a mitzvah. In fact, there was a bracha you said, before you ate it. And when the Kohanim made it, it says that the owners get atonement from the owner, from the Kohanim eating it. In other words, it's like God eating it. And the people who are eating it, as the Gemara says, it's ke'eved hanoitel pras. It's like the master giving his servants a piece, like God giving you to eat. So from a general perspective, this is going to Hashem, this is going to people. But if you go into the details, it's Hashem eating it twice. One through Hashem, through the Mizbeach, and one through people. That's also achilas gavaya. It's also an inyan of Hashem. It's also avodas Hashem. They're doing a mitzvah. This is a shlichus from Hashem. So it's like Hashem having, so to speak, two meals, one on the altar and one through the people. They're eating it as shluchim of Hashem, shluchim shladam kamaisai, as the Gemara explains in Beitzen and Sukkah. Shulchan gavaya kazach. The same idea. So therefore, Beis Hillel says you pay more for the Chagigah. This explains the end of the Mesechta. What's the connection? About Gehenim not affecting the Talmud Chacham and not affecting the sinner, the Pesheya Yisrael. Why? After the Mishnah and the Gemara about the coverings of the Mizbeach, which is the place where Hashem dwelled, v'shachanti b'soichem, and the Gemara explains the view of the Rabbanon, that when you look into the details, you see a covering that is subservient to the Keli. It's subservient to the Keli. So now the Gemara says, this is reflected in every Jew, v'shachanti b'soichem, who's also a Mishkan for Hashem. Because we follow Beis Hillel, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. And when you dissect the details of a person, when you take an x-ray, when you see what's going on in the depth of a person, you'll see that even the negative things by the Poshe Yisrael, by the sinners, don't constitute their essence. It's just a tzipui. It's just a cover-up. And it's completely subservient and it melts away when compared to the essence. The essence of every Jew is goodness, is holiness, is divinity. So how can the fire of Gehenna rule over them when they are pure goodness and holiness and godliness? There is negativity and toxicity and sins. He says that's the tzipui, that's the cover. And Beis Hillel already told us that the tzipui is batal legabayu. It's completely batal, it's completely dissolves and becomes insignificant when you could see the pure essence. And now we come to the final point, the final seif, which I'm going to say outside. You could look at it inside, it's beautiful inside, but I'm just going to say it outside. This is the last seif. What's the last sif? Beis Hillel teaches us how you have to look at a Jew. And we go back to the argument with the chassan and the kala. You remember? Beis Shammai said, you speak about the bride the way she is. Beis Hillel said, no, every bride you say, she's beautiful and gracious. Hashem and the Jewish people are called a groom and a bride. The word Shammai means evaluation. Shammai evaluates every Jew and his or her behaviors and says you have to see how he's behaving, how he's living, kala kamay shehi, and that's how you react to them, that's how you relate to them. The word Hillel means a halo, light, as it says in Iyov, Behiloi neirei al roishi. The candle is shining on my head. Hillel brings a flame and he lights up, Hiloi, a halo. And he shows the pnimius. He says, let's take an x-ray. Let's take a CAT scan. Let's look at the deeper layers when we dissect and analyze a person, and you'll see that internally, every Jew is pure goodness, kala nova chasuda. And I'll prove it to you. If somebody buys something from the market and you think it's bad, do you say it's beautiful or ugly? He says, who chose these Jews? Hashem went to the market and lakach mekach. He chose the Jewish people. So now when you're talking to Hashem, do you say, wow, you chose a beautiful mekach or you chose an ugly mekach? You chose a beautiful item, a beautiful color, you chose a horrible color. You say externally, I don't see it. I see a Jew who's spiritually deformed. I see a Jew who's spiritually blemished. That doesn't change the truth. It doesn't change his internal reality. It doesn't change his essence. I'm not lying and saying he's doing a mitzvah when he's doing a sin. But the fact is that the chassan chose him and took this mekach, says Beis Hillel, look at the Jew and say, kala nova chasuda. But there's a condition. Mu'urav v'mabriyas, you have to be integrated with people. He said you have to understand what people go through. You have to understand the nisyonis that exist in this world. You have to understand the journey of a neshama in Olam Hazeh. As the Rebbe said in the Sikha, then a malach, an angel, finds always blemishes in the Jewish people. In all the stories, the malachim find avlas. They always find the wrong things. He says, but when a malach comes down into this world, they don't even withstand a small test. Because in heaven, it's easy to be sacred. You want to understand Kala Nova Chasuda, you have to look at the journey of a soul. You have to look at the body. You have to look at the situation in this world. You have to look at their background. Yes, you have to take an x-ray and see everything. And then you'll reach the truth and say, Kala Nova Chasuda. Hashem knew what he was doing. She's a beautiful and amazing bride. And he says, this is the lesson for everybody. You know, the Rebbe said that when Mashiach comes, Allah is going to be like Beis Shammai. Because then Tumah will be removed from the earth, and then the outside can reflect the inside, and the outside should reflect the inside. There's a seamless flow between the inside and the outside. If the inner person is healthy, it comes out on the outside. But when you know that a person is sick, you need an x-ray, because you have to see how the outside and the inside are not consistent with each other. When Mashiach comes, the world will be a beautiful place. The halacha is like Beis Shammai. Kala Nova Chasuda, you see it on the outside. In Galus and in Olam Hazeh with a lot of nisyonis, you have to be able to know that Allah is like Beis Hillel. You see by a Jew, the Rebbe said something negative, so you could tell yourself, oh, spiritually this is a blind Jew, a lame Jew. How can I even have a connection with you and a love to you? Says Beis Hillel, don't look with eyes of flesh. Al tabet al mareyu. Don't look at him with einei basa, with eyes of flesh. Don't look at the coverings. Hashem chose him and took him as his own. She is a Kala Nova Chasuda. And if you see this person, it's so that you should shine a light on the person and help reveal his pnimius to himself. Help reveal to herself who she is. When you believe in them, they can believe in themselves. You know why you met this person? You know why this is your child? You know why this is your friend? You know why you came in contact with this person? So that you should help them see themselves. You should light a flame. Be a Hillel. And we know in these days, in Zman Hazeh halacha is like Beis Hillel. And the Gemara says in Brachas Lamed Vav that Beis Shammai now is not even an authority. Because in this world, the halacha is only like Beis Hillel. Don't look at a Jew only from your external eyes of flesh. Always see the internal truth. He's a Kala Nova Chasuda, and your job is to bring that out in the most revealed way. He said, that's how you dance in front of a Kala. That's how you bring joy to the Kala and to the Chas and to Hashem and the Jewish people. And that's what brings the Nisuyin, the ultimate marriage. The Medrash says the ultimate Nisuyin between Hashem and the Jewish people will be Mashiach comes. Then the halacha could be like Beis Shammai, because all impurity will be removed from earth. And then, even from the most external eyes of flesh in the most revealed way, when you will look at a Jew the way he or she looks externally, Kala Kamashi, you'll also be able to say, Kala Nova Chasuda. Okay, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. The second part of the Hadran, we're going to continue Be'ezer Hashem Parshas Vayakel, where we get into the whole part of Gehenim. Talmud Chacham, Parsha Yisrael. We'll see you back in 3 weeks. I did it. Okay, gotta go to the next shiur. The Chevra in Eretz Yisrael are almost